You're listening to Back Pew Convos.
I'm Sean.
And I'm Sal. And this is the podcast God wants you to listen to.
So if you want to remain in God's will, have a sit down.
Grab a beverage of your choice.
And have a listen.
You're welcome. Doing the thing you do. The Own-Eaters.
The Own-Eaters.
Yeah.
That's classic.
Sure enough.
That is a classic
I am Spartacus.
Thomas Hanks movie. Tom Honk.
Lots of good ones.
Yeah. Actually, one of your faves I've never seen before. Can you guess it?
One of my favorite
Tom Hanks
movies?
Yeah. Can you guess what it is? It's not A League of Their Own.
I do like that one too. My favorite one of his is probably Forrest Gump.
I've never seen it. That's what I'm talking about. That's the one. I've seen parts of it. I've seen parts.
What is wrong with you?
I know something about a box of chocolates and running. That's all I know.
No, that's not even. All right, so next week there's no podcast. We're going to be watching Forrest Gump.
Well, I don't know. That's all I got to say about it. I think that this sound pad, I dropped the volume, so it might not be as loud this week. I feel like whenever I listen back to last week's episode, the sound pad was kind of loud. So
well, you need to at least turn up the bleep button, because when I get ready to drop some F-bombs, I need...
There's one volume for all the sound pads.
Let me just drop an F-bomb and see if you can cover it up.
All right.
Mother! That'll work.
Okay. Cool beaners.
Because I've dropped so many of them on this.
So many.
That's what I do. It's just part of my vocabulary now.
Right. The people need to know.
Mother Faith!
Are we going to pick a word this week?
Fudge.
There it is. Are we going to pick a word this week that we're going to bleep out? It's too much.
It's a lot for you, because I'm not bleeping nothing. You're in control.
Yeah.
You're the producer.
Well, then we're not doing any of that. Sound good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, duder.
What's up, dude?
Yeah, I don't know.
What are we doing? What am I? Where am I?
Yeah.
What is this place?
I don't know.
Sheol?
No, this is not Sheol. Whatever this is.
Hades?
It's not Hades.
Tartarus?
Or Sheol.
Gehenna?
Gehenna?
I kind of yelled into the mic. That one was probably loud.
You did. It clipped.
Sorry.
I saw it.
Gehenna gets me
red.
Gehenna gets me fired up.
Does it?
Can't help it.
Well, I guess it
There's
ought
something about flames and the gnashing of teeth.
Right.
That
Weeping.
Weeping just gets me fired up. Gets me pumped.
Yeah. Just thinking about all that torment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Metal.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, are we... I don't even know what to do at this point, because you've been forcing me to actually conversate with you before we get into our topic, so I don't even know anymore. Like, what are we doing?
I know it's such a terrible thing, right? You got to talk to your friend.
Got to talk to my best pal.
Like, how horrible is that? You're forcing me to conversate with you.
Now, today has been, I don't know. Today's been a pretty good day. We had the men's Bible study last night. The Paul and Silas night is what we call it, because we're usually there late hours of the night. Early morning.
PNS, as I call it.
PNS, yeah. And so...
PNS.
PN? As in Nerf?
As in, yeah, like N, like An. A-N.
All right.
Because you cut the D off, because I'm a redneck.
Oh, okay.
You know, I talk like one. Don't you hear my voice?
P and S.
No, it's not P and S. It's P and S. Not to be confused with the other.
Paness.
You were... Definitely,
I was trying to make it more redneck than you instead of.
you definitely were slow on the beat button on that one.
Well. You know, we went to the P&S. I can't do it now without hearing it.
You went to the Paul and
We went
Silas.
to Paul and Silas last night, and you know what? We had a good time. It was a good time. We had actually quite a few people show up, and you weren't one of them. You scuzz.
That's right. That's why it was a good time, because I wasn't there to ruin things.
No. There was several people that showed up that aren't normally there. It was like probably 4 or 5 people that was like their first Paul and Silas, which, you know.
First timers.
Yeah, which was good because we didn't get anything too controversial, you know, so I don't, you know. Yeah, I always wonder, like, whenever there's brand new people coming in, like, what are they thinking when if we get into something that's kind of like,
Yeah.
you know.
It is kind of hard, especially because a lot of times they're coming from somewhere else.
Yeah.
So it's like you don't know what they did before, or like where they're coming from. You know what I mean? Like what kind of did they have something sort of similar to this, or did
Yeah.
what kind of doctrine they've been studying on, or they're probably just trying to figure out what in the heck we're doing.
Right.
So yeah, it is.
Yeah. But yeah, we had several people there, and the topics were, they were fine. They weren't like, to me, I mean, we talked about it a lot because, you know, we can talk. Once we get together like that, we can go. And there wasn't anything said that was like, I don't know that I would say that we were like dragging things out, but really the topics we probably really could have said everything that needed to be said, like that actually needed to be said about it, in like 30 minutes and went home. You know,
Yeah.
They weren't like super, like, not that they weren't good, but they weren't like super deep topics.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So
That was what I thought when I seen what they were. I was, it wasn't something that seemed too heavy. You know what I mean? It's not too heavy. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. So.
Right. But anytime we have one of those, so like the next day, so I ended up, because I didn't want to wake Candace up. I got home late. She was in there snoozing.
Snoozing away. Snoring, probably.
Yeah.
Heard that, Candace.
And so I was like, you know what? And I was wide awake. So I was like, I'm just going to go lay on the couch. I don't want to even, like, worry about waking her up or whatever.
You was jazzed up, huh? Fired up, pumped.
I was. Well, I had way too much coffee yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
So
That'll do that every
I
time.
was getting all jittery. And then I had 2 more cups whenever I went to church. I had like a whole pot. And then I had two more, like, large cups whenever I went to church. So yeah, because I didn't sleep like fantastic. So been kind of like, sort of sluggish a little bit today, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Mine's been wandering a lot today too.
Your mind's been wandering, huh?
I haven't been able to focus a lot today. So hopefully that doesn't continue. Hopefully that just stopped immediately whenever I push record.
I'm believing it.
Yep. Gotta have faith.
I've been pretty sluggish today too. Did not go to Paul and Silas.
Yep.
Because my alarm was set for 4 a.m. Today was supposed to be my last long run before I run my 50K race.
Right.
I say that because I'm to a point in my training to where, like, I still have a couple of 15 milers, but that's not even like long anymore. So today I had 20 miles. And we also had a full day of things planned to do as a family. And so, like, I don't like to be a burden with, because it takes me to do 20 miles, it takes me 4 hours about.
Right.
So it's a lot of time. So I try to get up. Like, I got up at 4, was trying to be done by 10, which I didn't succeed at. But I actually got up and got dressed, got ready, drove to the track, because at that time of morning, the sun's not up, and I'm not trying to get run over, so I'm going to run at the track. So bad enough as it is, 20 miles at the track, right? That's a lot of laps.
Right.
And my truck said it was 5 degrees outside, and I ran 1 lap, and I was in so much pain from the cold. My hands were hurting so bad that I just walked. I completed the lap and never even stopped. I just went straight to my truck.
Yeah.
Came home and was like, forget this. I'm just going to do it on the treadmill. So I ran 20 miles on the treadmill today.
That sounds god awful. I don't know which is worse. I mean, I guess not being that cold is being that cold's probably worse.
Yeah.
But
well, it was so cold to the point like my hands were hurting so bad that I was like I thought it was detrimental to my health. Like I could have gotten frostbite or something. It was that cold. Like my hands hurt, and so I came home and did it on the treadmill, and so that was all done first thing in the morning. So I've been tired ever since. Because then we went to this place with the Took Finn. It's a place where they can play. There's like a big ball pit and like a sand pit and all kinds of toys and whatever. And he run around the place like a madman. So, and then we've been gone all day. We got home and you guys came over and now we're here. So it's been nonstop, which is kind of good because if I have time to stop, I'll probably crash. That's the secret, is that you just keep going.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. We, when I got up this morning, I spent a couple hours listening to the last episode that we recorded and making sure there wasn't anything that needed to be edited out, which there was. So I edited some things.
Got one of my F-bombs?
No. It was just a lot of dead silence and some parts of it.
Which if you haven't listened to that one, please do, because it was a really good one.
Yeah.
I thought.
I didn't know what to name it. The name I came up with was kind of like, I think it fits the theme pretty well.
Yeah, it was fine.
But I could see where some people might not like the title.
I didn't have any better suggestions, so.
Right. Well, we titled it Sing Yo Truth, which obviously is sort of a...
You know...
That can be triggering.
Can it?
To some folks.
I wouldn't even think about that.
Well, like if... Those that would want to push back against the idea of like speaking your truth or whatever, your truth.
Oh, because instead of the truth?
Instead of the truth.
I gotcha.
Yeah. So, I mean, I could see where some...
That's awful presumptuous of somebody to think that their truth is the truth, but...
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah. I don't know. So, I don't even... But really, I didn't even think about it that whenever I posted. I thought about it after the fact. So, you know what? If you're listening to this and you didn't really like the title of the last one, sorry, get over it. I don't know. Take your pick, whichever one you want. We weren't like trying to push any sort of agenda by it. I just really didn't know what to name it.
Right.
So,
well, you know what made me think about what that made me think about. I didn't even think before, like when we were actually doing that, recording the podcast, but sing your truth. Like sometimes I do that. Like if the words, if the words, well, half the time I don't know the words.
You gotta make up your own anyway.
But even if there have been times when I was like, I don't know if I like this, so I'm just gonna say this, and so like I'll still sing the song along, but when it gets to that one line, I'll sing whatever I like better.
I've heard that other people do that also.
Yeah,
I don't do that, but I don't sing along a ton.
I don't either, to be honest.
But yeah,
even though I do have the voice of an angel,
that's what I hear. From you, mostly, but
I've been told I am the songbird of my generation.
That's Will Ferrell. Yeah, what else did we do? So I edited the episode, put that out. We went grocery shopping, went to Texas Roadhouse, got myself a nice steak. Yeah, did grocery shopping, came home, put the stuff away. I kind of bummed myself out watching some reels and stuff on Instagram. I shouldn't even have it. I only have social media because of the podcast.
Right.
Because I actually hadn't gotten rid of it. But like now that I have it, like because I usually check our page.
Right.
And because our page, because the content that we create, most of the stuff that comes across our Instagram is like religious themed.
Right. Most of the pages that we follow are, and
yeah. So like if the reels and stuff that you get, we get a lot from like, you know, the type of people that we follow and engage with on the Instagram, but then we get some that are just from Christianity and like just in general.
Yeah.
So like, so we're getting people that, you know, we probably would, at the very least, we would probably frame things differently than they do, you know?
That's a very nice way of putting it.
So I kind of ended up getting myself in a little bit of a like, it's kind of like, man, like
social media can do that.
Yeah.
It's one of those things, like I've always been because I remember several years ago, like people, I guess it was when social media first kind of blew up, because we're old, so we were there before social media. But like when it first blew up in like churches and like religious circles, it was like real frowned upon as like, or at least the ones that we were in, as like, you know, a negative thing. And people still, I think, kind of view it as a negative thing, and it can be, as you're saying.
Yeah, it can.
And I was always like a proponent of it, just because I felt like it was such an easy way to connect people. Like there's no better way to get a message out to a bigger number of people.
Yeah.
Like so I think it's a good thing, but to your point, like, yeah, it can
be a negative place too.
It doesn't take a lot either, really. Like you can just see one thing that just completely changes, you know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I saw what I saw was like a reel from like a popular, you know, pretty well known.
Say your name. Say your name. And then hit the boo button.
We don't have a boo button yet.
See, say it and I'll boo.
No, I don't want to be a jerk about it. Alyssa Childers is who it was.
Boo.
No, I mean, because here's the thing.
I'm kidding. I'm not a jerk like that.
I'm sure that she's well-intentioned.
Right.
You know?
Well, maybe.
I mean, maybe not. You never know. It's hard to know someone else's intentions, but I know that once you have a following like that, I think that you have like, you probably do have like a responsibility to continue, you know, giving your audience what they want.
Yeah, if you want to continue to profit.
Right. So, I mean, especially once you've got a little bit of notoriety.
Right.
You know? But anyway, she was talking about, it was her and this other guy, I don't even know his name, but they had just recently wrote a book about deconstruction. And I don't know, it just got me in a weird mental space, because it's like, what she's talking about is like, it's not even like, it doesn't match my experience with it at all.
Right.
You know, so it's like, it almost made me like, I don't know, like, should we abandon the term deconstruction? Like, is that even what I experience? Like if there are people saying they've deconstructed and what they've done is actually deconvert, and like they're now atheists that are like pushing hard against the church. Right. If that's what it is, then that's not me.
Right.
You know? So, yeah, I don't know.
I think that there is a degree a population of people that have done that very thing. I mean, I know for a fact, like there is, but it's one of those things to where there's not at least the way that I've always understood the term and the way that I use the term, it's just any kind of doing away with the junk. You know what I'm saying? So like there's no certain like set degree. It's like you reconstruct your faith and get rid of all this other kind of faith, but you haven't officially quote unquote deconstructed until you hit this percentage of things that you've like there's no there's no like hard like, oh, you haven't truly deconstructed unless you're an atheist. Like, I don't think so, because I have completely deconstructed where I was 10 years ago. Yeah. It's completely deconstructed that, but I've rebuilt something better. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? So in that respect, I don't know, man. I think that you're being a little bit nicer to her than I would be, but yeah, just simply because from some of the things that I've heard, I haven't even seen the reel that you're talking about, but some of the things that I've heard and read from her. Yeah. It seems to me like she's kind of like what I hinted at before. She's got an audience, she's making money, and she's pandering to that audience to continue to make more money. That's what it seems like to me, because I also follow many people who are in the quote-unquote deconstruction community. Right. Another one she's after is progressive Christians. You know, I follow a lot of people in the progressive Christian community, and I know some of them are very well-known authors and podcast hosts who have reached out to her, and none of them ever received a response. If she wanted to truly talk to people in that community, there are more than enough people who are foaming at the mouth to have that conversation. Oh, yeah. No, because they're not going to give her the answers that she wants. Yeah. So I don't. That's why I don't know the lady personally, and so I'm not. Oh yeah. I don't know. Yeah. But from the outside looking in, that's how as somebody as that consider, because I consider myself as both a community, part of the community of deconstruction and progressive Christian. So as somebody who fits into both of those communities, knowing some of the things that she said that seems pretty dishonest and disingenuous to me.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan, I would just say.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm just naive. I always try to give people the benefit of the doubt and just assume that people have good intentions. But, I mean, maybe not. I don't know. I do know, I forgot actually until you said that, but I do, you're right. I have heard numerous people.
Yeah.
Actually, you know Randall Rouser, right?
No.
You probably would know him if you saw him.
Probably.
Anyway, he actually wrote a book in response to her book.
Mm-hmm.
What was it called? Another Gospel? Is that what the name of her book was? Where she attacked progressive Christianity? Because she says outright that it's that we're not even, that progressive Christians, I say we, but I don't actually identify myself as a progressive Christian. But she claims that progressive Christians aren't even worshiping the same God. That it's another gospel. It's a different religion. It's not even the same religion.
Right.
It's a different Jesus. It's different everything. So that's what she believes, that progressive Christians twist it so much so that it's not even the same thing.
Right.
So that's why her book is called Another Gospel. And then, but Randall Rouser wrote a book in response to that book called Progressive Christians Love Jesus Too. And, like, if you look at the covers, they're very similar. Yeah. Like, it's obviously a response to her.
Yeah. Well, it just made me think about, like, in rap, like, people putting out, like, diss records. Like, diss tracks. Like, this is the nerd diss track, is write a book and respond to your book.
Right.
Like, I'm going to write a book that is responding to her book that responds to your book.
But I said all that just to say that, like, I know, because I've watched videos from him on YouTube and listened to his podcast that he has, and I've heard him say several times, like on multiple occasions, that he's reached out to her, to try to get, like, to talk about it, because he wrote the book in response to her book. So he was like, let's talk about this. Like, if you feel that strongly about progressive Christianity, let's talk about it.
Right. Well, I know,
and she won't do it.
I know. I heard the exact same thing. Keith Giles is the one that comes to mind, because I know he's mentioned it a couple times.
Yeah.
And, like, he's written so many books. He's on, I know of at least 3 podcasts that are pretty well known.
Yeah.
Like,
especially in that community of progressive Christians.
And he hasn't just wrote like book after book after book. Like, he actually, like, runs the publishing company.
Choir.
Choir Publishing. So, like, he's I would consider a pretty big name in that community, and he's said multiple times on multiple different podcasts that he has reached out to her saying, let's have this conversation.
Yeah.
And just radio silence. So,
yeah. And I didn't want to get into, like, I'm not trying to get into, like, a rant on her or anything, but
I am.
I mean, we can just scratch the whole topic and just talk about deconstruction again. I don't know.
It's something that I'm going to talk about probably all the time, because it's a huge part of it. And actually, now you are going to get me on a rant, because it's something that just drives me up the wall. It really does tick me off to a certain degree. And I should say, if you don't know me in actual real life, I don't get ticked off that easy all that often. Like, I'm a pretty easygoing guy.
I got the bleep button ready.
Nah. But I hear this pushback against the term deconstruction. I hear people talking about, like, how can deconstruction be a good thing and all this, and all I hear is, like, you just don't understand what it is then, because what you're saying is all these things that you have. So you've studied your Bible, and you've prayed and developed your relationship with Jesus and all these, and you've discovered that all this other stuff that you used to believe, you no longer believe anymore. It's not based in biblical truth. It's based in man-made dogma.
Right.
What you're saying is you want me to hold on to all that crap because deconstruction is a bad thing. That's what deconstruction is. It's just getting rid of the crap, getting rid of the junk. It's flushing the toilet and letting the doo-doo go down. That's what it is.
Well, but see, that's what's so funny about it. That's why I say it's like, I don't know. Like, how are we not talking about the same thing here? Because she said pretty much that exact same thing. That she was like, and that's okay. What you just said was okay. But to her, for some reason, that she doesn't view that as deconstruction, I guess. Like, actually, let me see if I can pull up some of the things that she had said about it here. So she says, I think maybe this is a quote. It looks like it. It's a quote from her book that I mentioned that she wrote. It says, asking your hard questions, correcting your false beliefs, and facing your deepest doubts are all a natural part of maturing as a Christian. That does not mean you need to deconstruct your faith.
What is it then? That is literally what it is.
Yeah, see, that's what I'm not sure about. And it may just be the term deconstruction. Like, maybe there's just something I'm not understanding about the term deconstruction that she had, some conception that she has in her mind.
I would argue it's the other way around. There's something that she doesn't understand, like, because it sounds to me from that quote only, that what she is talking about is what you were talking about, completely flattening everything and walking away, becoming an atheist, like just saying, I deconstructed it all and never reconstructed anything.
Yeah.
I think that's what she's talking about there. The problem is she's using a blanket term.
Yeah.
That's not what that means.
Right. No, I don't know. Without talking to her, I don't know what she means by it. You know?
You can talk to us. We will talk to you.
I mean, yeah, I would. She's never going to hear this, but like I would talk to her about it.
She might. When this thing blows up.
Well, here's another quote. She says, faith deconstruction is a postmodern process of rethinking your faith without regarding Scripture as a standard.
See, who says who? Says who?
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm somebody who's a part of, like, I've been in this process for a decade. So I've been reading books from the people that have been a part of this community. I've listened to podcasts for a decade on deconstruction, and literally nobody is saying that. Nobody. I have not heard one single person say that.
No, me either. And also,
but this lady who's not a part of the community is the authority on this. That's what we're saying here.
I guess.
Someone who's not a part of the community, who never has been, who's just going to poo-poo all over it. She's the one that gets to write books about it and decide what's what. Like, get out of here.
Well, one thing that is a little frustrating, and I don't want to keep going on and on about this because, you know,
this isn't even our topic, by the way.
No, it's not. It really has almost nothing to do with our topic, really. But like, I've just from what I haven't read her book,
and I never will.
I've listened to parts of podcasts. I have watched some things on her YouTube channel.
Right.
But not a lot. So just throwing that out there, just getting that out of the way first before I say what I'm going to say. From the exposure to her I've had, it seems like she puts a lot of emphasis on her own personal experiences, which is something that she likes to poo-poo on, right?
Right.
But like she had an experience where she went to this like Bible study group or something, and I guess there was progressive Christians there, and she had a weird experience with it, and so that kind of like put a bad taste in her mouth about progressive Christianity. But that's based on your experience, like one experience that you had personally. And then she also, in terms of deconstruction, I heard her speak about an experience she had where she was talking about what she thought was a process of deconstruction that she went through with someone. And this person was like, oh, you haven't deconstructed. You didn't really deconstruct because you still believe the Bible's inspired and you still believe that Jesus died and resurrected, like basic tenets of the Christian faith. Like,
yeah.
So she was like, well, if that's what deconstruction is, then no, I guess I didn't deconstruct. So, you know what I mean? So like, but that's based on one experience you had with one person.
Allegedly.
Well, yeah.
And I say that because, again, I've been involved in this for a decade plus and have never, ever heard people say things like that.
Yeah.
But
I don't, yeah. Anyway, we've been talking for 30 minutes now about illicit childers and not our topic. So,
Hey, sometimes I just let the Lord lead me.
Yeah. And I mean, we can.
No, it really isn't. To me, it's not.
It's
not as much like this whole thing isn't as much about her as it just is the overall misunderstanding of deconstruction.
Yeah, it's not as nothing against her personally.
Yeah, that's what drives me nuts, and because I personally know people who think like that, and who's like, and that makes me look a certain way in their eyes.
Yeah.
Because they're getting information from this other person.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
So it does, like, I am passionate about it to an extent. It has really nothing to do with her other than she's one of those voices, but.
Yeah. I mean, if she is if someone has not been through a personal experience of deconstruction and all they've heard about deconstruction is her book, her podcast.
Yeah.
And they hear you say that you had a process of deconstruction,
right?
They are going to think that you have done something that you have not done.
Right. And I would just say, going back to, like, this goes way back to, like, our deconstruction stories, but, like, what was the one thing that the one word that I would use to sum up my experience with it? It was loneliness. Like, it feels so lonely because you feel like everybody's judging you and everybody, like, you're not a part of this group that you've been a part of anymore, and you feel like you're the outsider, and all that does is create that feeling. I guess that's why I get so passionate about it, because it triggers that within me, that, like, that feeling that I used to have, that feeling like I was the one weirdo in the outside looking in, all by myself, that wasn't a part of my group that I used to be tight with, like, it triggers all that within me.
Yeah. And I think that she's fueling the fire for other people, making that, like what you're talking about, making that worse for some people probably.
Right.
Through this. And it's hard enough as it is, man.
Yeah.
No one needs help making it harder than it has to be.
Yeah. Ultimately, we're all just trying our best here.
Yeah. So anyway, we'll get off the.
What's our topic for today?
We talking about the rich man and Lazzy.
Lazzy. I'm certainly not the rich man.
I am neither of these guys.
Yeah, I don't have sores either.
You get dogs.
I do have dogs.
You got some dogs.
And I am poor. No, I'm not that poor, though. I ain't sitting on the outside of the gates. Outside the gates. Hey, that's inside the gates, ain't it? Inside the gates.
Yeah, because we're the ones in.
Yeah, I got you.
No, we're going to talk about rich man and Lazarus.
You know what? If there's anybody outside, I'm standing in solidarity with them.
Yep. We should, right?
I would
That's
think.
what Jesus did. He was crucified outside.
Yeah, he was.
Outside the gates of Jerusalem.
Man, I didn't even think about the gates being part of this. Like, I did not focus on the gates one bit in my studies on this.
Oh, yeah.
You got that, huh?
I got some stuff on it.
Good thing one of us
I got
did.
some tings.
I did study The Rich Man and Lazarus. I've read it. I don't even know how many times this week, but
7D?
Not 7D, but maybe 7.
That's a nice complete number. I like that.
But I've just got so much other stuff been studying too. I'm doing Sunday school this week. So,
like what?
So I've been studying Luke 13, which is hard, I thought. Took me like I had to marinate on that one for a minute.
Yeah.
So
yeah, there's some stuff in that one that
the thing about this Rich Man and Lazarus to me, and I'm sure that you probably had a similar experience, but I guess you can call me a liar if you want.
I'm ready, willing.
It's so hard, I think, to see anything other than what, like, when you've been taught a certain way to see a scripture. Yeah, it is so hard to see it any other way. Right. Even when you're trying, like, sometimes I try. That's what I was also doing with Luke 13 for Sunday school, like trying not just to make something up, but I wanted to try to see, is there something else that I can get from this that might be a unique perspective? You know what I'm saying? Because I don't want to just present the same old things over and over again. Like, is there something that I can find in here that's maybe most people wouldn't think about, or something that's a little bit unique? And it's so hard to do when you've got 35 years, 36, 37 is how old I am, but I only count 30. They probably didn't teach me the rich man Lazarus till I was at least 2 or 3. I don't know. But
surely not.
But when you've got 30 plus years of I use the word indoctrination, and I don't want to because that's associated with bad, and I don't mean it in that way.
Yeah.
I just mean that's the way it's been taught to me.
Right.
For my whole life. It's so hard to see it any other way,
Yeah, I feel you.
But I did try my best to find something there.
So why are we talking about it?
I don't know, but I think the reason why it came up as one that we wanted to talk about is because it's so often cited as a supporting passage for hell.
I like the way you said that.
It's one of those that people want to point to. I mean, I know that I can think of personal experiences where we start talking about reconciliation, universal reconciliation, and people are like, yeah, and that's one of those verses that they point to is in the rich man and Lazarus it says this and this and this.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, because whenever we did our episode on, ultimate redemption, it was I think we specifically mentioned that we weren't going to do Rich Man and Lazarus in those episodes because it deserved its own,
right?
But because of that reason, what you're talking about, that it is often used as proof text, for eternal conscious torment, and I just don't think has anything to do with it, really. But
yeah, I mean, now that we're just coming right out and saying that, when I read it through this time, the more I read it, the further and further I got away from thinking this has anything at all to do with that. At first, because that's the only way it's been taught to me, it's okay, I see what you're saying. And then the more you read it, and then you read the passages that are right before it and right after it, and you're like, I don't. By the time I got to the end, I was like, no, I don't think it has anything to do with this. I think that even though the afterlife is the setting of the story, I don't think the point was ever to be this is exactly what happens when you die. And I think if you just look at the way things are phrased, that's kind of obvious. Yeah. First of all, Abraham's bosom.
Yeah.
So where all the souls are just going to gather at the chest of Abraham, dude must have been broad, all right? I don't know how much he benched. I wouldn't have thought that much.
Right.
Must have been a big one.
Yeah.
So...
yeah, I mean, it's obviously not a literal thing.
There's a chasm that can't be crossed. My spirit legs can't jump, or what? That whole idea,
yeah. Why is Abraham the authority figure? Where's God at?
Right.
In this?
So I think and I know it sounds silly, and if you're listening to this, I hope you're saying, "Well, duh, you're not supposed to take it so literally." Yeah, I know that's the point I'm trying to make.
Right. Yeah. And actually, so there was a couple of things that I had in my notes that I thought we should probably talk about before we start breaking down the actual, actually get into reading the thing.
Yeah, you've got more notes than me, so you kick us off.
So, I mean, the first thing the question that I asked on my notes here, is this a parable, or is it supposed to be a true story?
Right.
Because there is debate, even amongst scholars.
Right.
There's debate about it, whether it is or isn't.
Right.
I think there's a pretty good amount of evidence to suggest that it is supposed to be a parable.
Yeah.
Personally.
I think so. I think that the only reason that it's even debated is because there is a specific name used.
Yeah.
Almost in every time that Jesus tells a parable, it either says he taught them in parables or something to that effect.
Yeah.
Or the characters aren't given a proper name. They're like the sower or a rich man, or you know what I'm saying? They're given a descriptor but not a name. In this story, someone actually has a proper name, Lazarus.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, where that debate comes in.
Well, but in saying that is how Jesus begins this story. He doesn't begin with using the name Lazarus. He says, there was a rich man.
Right.
And that's how pretty much every other parable that he to your point, that's how he always opens his parables.
Well,
in that way.
And from my understanding, again, we have to say it at least once per episode. We're not scholars and have never been to seminary, and we don't know, but we've done our own, we've tried our best to do our research on this stuff. And, from what I was reading and researching, it seems that this parable or story, what word you want to use, it's not like Jesus just made this up on the spot.
Right.
It was my understanding is that it's been found in like 7 different languages or something, like to where it's a common story to where like when the people heard the story, they would have been like, oh yeah, I know what he's talking about. Like I remember this story.
Yeah. From what I understand, there was, it's possible. We don't know.
Right.
But it's possible that this is a Jewish folktale. Well, the story that Jesus tells is based on a common, well-known Jewish folktale that may have derived actually from like an Egyptian folktale about
Egyptian was
Osiris.
what I'd seen too. Yeah, and Osiris.
Yeah. But what's interesting from my study on it is that in the Jewish story, the common story of the day, it's the exact opposite. Which is in common Jesus fashion, he's taking this and flipping it on its head, right?
Right. It's everywhere. I love it.
So like in the original story, it's the rich man that has a name that doesn't die nameless. The rich man dies with a name, and is carried to Abraham's bosom and receives his reward.
Right.
Because if you that was how you measured whether you were, if you're well off, then you were being blessed by God. Obviously, you're doing things right. Yeah. If you're poor, then you're not.
Right.
So like
which is a common theme in a lot of the Old Testament.
Yeah. Right. So like it's the exact opposite when Jesus tells the story though.
Which is also pretty common in the Bible.
Yeah. Yeah.
So as much as people want to make it a cohesive, a univocal thing, there is often that flipping things upside down that happen often with Jesus if you pay attention.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that all of those things considered, and then I actually also read this, and I thought this was really interesting. There's even some manuscripts that we have where this story begins with Jesus saying, not with Jesus saying, but the manuscript, that there are some manuscripts that we have that begin this section with the phrase, and he spoke to them another parable. It's not in every manuscript, but we do have manuscripts where it says that.
Right.
So whether that was an addition and wasn't meant to be a parable or not, I don't know. But we do have manuscripts that do say that.
It was either an addition or a subtraction. We don't know which.
Right, exactly. So, yeah, I mean...
But I think also, I feel, for me personally, I do think it's a parable. I take it as a parable. I think that, I mean, if you look at, because this is found in Luke 16.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you look at, like, chapter 16, like it starts, my Bible's got the headings in it here, like, the parable of the dishonest steward, application of the parable. Like, he's telling parables in this section.
Yeah, it's in the context of Luke. Well, it's a continuation,
right?
Because Luke 15.
He's telling parables in Luke 15. He's telling parables in Luke 13, probably 14 too, because it's right in the middle. Yeah, the parable of the great feast is in 14. So like, I think really actually this whole conversation starts in Luke 12 and continues on all the way through.
Does it?
Well, I know he's telling parables in 12 too, so I don't know if it's like different times, but.
Well, I know for sure it's at the very least. I didn't go back any further than 15 to see this.
Yeah.
But I know that 16 is a continuation of the same conversation as 15.
Right. Well, like I said, I'm doing Sunday school tomorrow on 13.
Yeah.
And then, which means, we just did 12 last week. And so like I know that 13 is a continuation of a speech he was giving in 12. And he was telling parables in both of those. And just because there is parables and a speech continued through, it makes sense that he did, but I haven't read all the way through it.
Right.
I mean, I have before, but not for this study.
Yeah. Which, I mean, that is interesting, right? Because the parables in 15 would seem to contradict an idea of eternal conscious torment.
Right.
Just the fact that he searches for the lost sheep until it's found.
Until
it's found. Like, that alone.
What about the lost coin? How long does she look for that one?
Until she found it. Yeah. Same thing with that, the prodigal son, he came home. Which I actually think that there's a lot of parallels. Because where's the older brother? The older brother that didn't see the younger brother as worthy.
Right.
Where is he in the story when the story ends?
Outside.
He's outside.
They're going to fit.
You might say there's a chasm fixed between him.
You could say that.
And the feast going on the inside, the party that's happening for the younger brother. You might say he's on the outside of the party with a chasm fixed.
You know what makes that even better is that there wasn't truly a chasm there. It was in his head.
It was in his head. Yeah.
He invented this chasm between him. There was never one there.
Yeah.
All he had to do was come in.
Yeah. And the father invites him.
Right.
And he tries to talk some sense into him. But he's out there in the outer darkness, right? Yeah. He's in the dark outside the party, weeping and gnashing his teeth, you might say.
And for whatever reason, I bet it smells like pig poop out there. I just got this feeling about it.
Probably so.
I only think that because in the parable or the story, the son, before he comes home, the younger one, he's eating with the pigs. Yeah. And that's when he reaches his pig pen moment, and so it puts that I know what a pig pen smells like, right? Just puts that memory in there.
Yeah.
I bet he went outside and it smells like doty.
Yeah, probably so. Yeah, I think that's true. I think maybe there was some, whenever he was in that pig pen, there was probably things that triggered things in his memory that he recalled home.
Yeah.
It's like this reminded him of home. You know what I mean? That's good. I'm glad you mentioned that.
I just made that up right off the top of my head.
That's good. Because, I think that's how, that's probably how God works, right? It's just like little, I don't know that God is really forceful. I might be wrong about that.
Right.
But, I could see that being part of the process of trying to draw you to him. Just little nudges here and there, little reminders, little, putting you in positions to cause things to stir in you.
Yeah.
Just little things like that.
I would say that's more my experience, at least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, are we going to get into this?
Yeah, man.
I do think we should back up, though.
Yeah.
To, just for a little context, before we get to the actual story.
You want to talk about divorce?
Well, I thought we'd skip that one.
Okay.
But verses 14 and 15.
14 and 15.
You want to read that?
All right. I am reading out of the New American Bible. This is my Catholic Bible. I'm not Catholic. But I bought this Bible because I was just interested in what was in those other books that we don't have.
Yeah.
And I kind of like it, to be honest. 14 and 15. All right.
Mm-hmm.
The Pharisees who loved money
Yep.
heard all these things and sneered at him.
Yeah.
And he said to them, "You justify yourselves in the sight of others, but God knows your hearts. For what is of human esteem is an abomination in the sight of God."
Yeah. So I just thought would be good to mention that it's about a rich man. And literally right before this, we're told that Jesus told this to the Pharisees who loved money.
Loved money.
So, again, the context clearly implies that Jesus is directing this probably to the Pharisees, right?
Yeah, you would assume.
It would be really weird if he didn't.
That would be my assumption.
So, it's addressed to the Pharisees. And when I was looking this, I did a little bit of research, and apparently the word Pharisee has an interesting meaning. It means to be separate. It means the separated ones. It was actually could mean to be separated from sin, as if they thought that they were separate from sin.
That tracks with my conception of it.
Yeah, which is interesting. Separate also has to do with holy, right?
Right.
If you view yourself as holy, separated.
Well, that's what I think when you say the word. It automatically, again, that's another one of those triggers for me because I think about the holiness codes. And
Yeah.
we're not like the world. Like, we don't dress like the world. We don't do this. We don't, because we're separate. We're special. We're holy. Like, that's what I think of. It triggers that within me.
Like there's a list of rules you got to follow to make yourself holy. Which
sounds a lot like this group of people I read about in the Bible. Oh, yeah, the Pharisees.
Yeah. So a couple notes that I had on just like before we even get into the actual thing here was in John 8, Jesus tells, you know what, we can go there actually real quick.
I knew you were going to go to John. You had to at some point.
Let me see if I've got it already pulled up on my phone here. John 8.
I don't hate it. John 8. I got it here.
Verse 31.
John 8 and 31 says, Jesus then said to those Jews who believed in him, if you remain in my word, you will truly be my disciples.
And you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free.
Freedom.
They answered him, we are Abraham's descendants and have never been enslaved to anyone. How is it that you say you will become free? Jesus answered them, truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who commits sin is the slave of sin. The slave does not remain in the house forever. The son does remain forever. So if the Son makes you free, you will be free indeed. I know that you are Abraham's descendants, yet you seek to kill me because my word has no place in you. My word has no place in you. Remember that. I speak the things which I have seen with my Father. Therefore you also do the things which you heard from your father. They answered him, Abraham is our father. So they're claiming Abraham as their father.
Right.
So let's keep that in mind too in here. Jesus said to them, if you are Abraham's children, do the deeds of Abraham. But as it is, you are seeking to kill me, a man who has told you the truth, which I heard from God. This Abraham did not do. You are doing the deeds of your father. They said to him, we are not born of fornication. We have one Father, God. Jesus said to them, if God were your father, you would love me. For I proceeded forth and have come from God. For I have not even come on my own initiative, but he sent me. Why do you not understand what I'm saying? Is it because you cannot hear my word? Again, it's that same theme. He's saying you can't hear my word. It is because you cannot hear my word. You are of your father, the devil.
The devil.
The devil. And you want to do the desires of your father. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth because there is no truth in him. Whenever he speaks a lie, he speaks it from his own nature, for he is a liar and the father of lies. But because I speak the truth, you do not believe me. Which one of you convicts me of sin? If I speak the truth, why do you not believe me? He who is of God hears the words of God. For this reason you do not hear them, because you are not of God. Trying to remember where I stopped. Let me skip down here.
We read enough that we could really go down a lot of rabbit holes there.
Yeah.
Because the first thing that stood out to my mind was in verse 33, they answered him, we are descendants of Abraham and have never been enslaved to anyone. Like, literally the entire story.
Yeah, that is
weird,
right?
It's a story of them being enslaved and then coming out of slavery. Then they are enslaved again, and then they come back from their captivity, and then they get enslaved again.
Yeah.
Like, that's the whole story is about being enslaved and freedom.
Yeah. Well, and they're also denying their own sinfulness, right? Like
right.
the fact that they could be enslaved to sin. I'm trying to remember what else I wanted to make mention of here. I'm just going to keep reading. The Jews answered and said to him, do we not say rightly that you are a Samaritan and have a demon? Jesus answered, I do not have a demon, but I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. But I do not seek my glory. There is one who seeks and judges. Truly, truly, I say to you, if anyone keeps my word, he will never see death. The Jews said to him, now we know that you have a demon. Abraham died. And the prophets also. And you say, if anyone keeps my word, he will never taste death. Surely you are not greater than our father Abraham, who died. I'm saying all this for a reason. I'm trying to get everyone to pay attention.
Building up a little foundation.
Yeah. Surely you are not greater than our father Abraham. They didn't believe that Jesus was the Messiah. They didn't believe that he was greater than Abraham.
Right. Well, even it says next, or the prophets.
Yeah.
Like they don't even think he's on the prophet level.
Right. The prophets died too. Whom do you make yourself out to be? Jesus answered, if I glorify myself, my glory is nothing. It is my Father who glorifies me, of whom you say he is our God. And you have not come to know him, but I know him. And if I say that I do not know him, I would be a liar like you. But I do know him, and keep his word. Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad. So the Jews said to him, you are not yet 50 years old, and you've seen Abraham? And Jesus said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was born, I am. I am.
Right. We all know what he's calling back to there.
Yeah. Therefore they picked up stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple. So I just wanted to read that first. And then, because he says that they're the father of lies, right? Mm-hmm. Their father is the devil, the father of lies. So whatever the devil is, it cannot create people. It can only create false people, false ones. It can cause us, through a lie, that's what the serpent did, right? It can cause us, through a lie, to try to create ourselves into the image of God with the knowledge of good and evil. And that's exactly what I think the Pharisees were doing, right, with these holiness codes and trying to follow the law, the strict adherence to the law. They were trying to use the knowledge of good and evil, take the knowledge of good and evil to make themselves into the image of God. But what they were really doing was making themselves into the image of, the accuser, I guess.
Right.
So, let me consult my notes. This is what the Pharisees were doing through their strict adherence to the law and elitist mentality. And Jesus says outright in verse 15 that they try to justify themselves.
Yep.
In Luke 16, verse 15, he says that they try to justify themselves. One more thing before we get into the meat here. I want to read Luke 18, 9 through 14. Unless you get there before
He
me.
then addressed this parable to those who were convinced of their own righteousness and despised everyone else.
Yeah.
2 people went up to the temple area to pray. One was a Pharisee and the other was a tax collector. The Pharisee took up his position and spoke the prayer to himself. "O God, I thank you that I am not like the rest of humanity, greedy, dishonest, adulterous, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and I pay tithes on the whole income." But the tax collector stood off at a distance and would not even raise his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast and prayed, "O God, be merciful to me, a sinner." I tell you, the latter went home justified, not the former. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and the one who humbles himself will be exalted.
Yeah. So Jesus is comparing the prayer of the Pharisee to the prayer of the tax collector. Mm-hmm. And it says that the Pharisee prayed to himself, and he said that, I thank God I'm not like this guy.
Yeah.
I thank God I'm not a swindler, unjust, adulterer, or even like this tax collector, because I fast twice a week. I pay tithes on all I get. But the tax collector, standing some distance away, was unwilling to lift up his eyes to heaven, it says.
Right. Thank God I'm not like that guy over there.
Yeah.
I'm not like that drug addict over there. Thank God I'm not like that guy sitting at the bar.
Yeah.
Thank God,
Right.
I'm not like those people living in sin, like those, whatever, plug in whatever you want to, right? Like
whatever sin you want to judge.
Point is, that's all of us, man. We've all been there.
Yeah. I thank God I'm not like this guy. And then, but the tax collector's response is, "God be merciful to me, a sinner."
Right.
He acknowledges his sinfulness. He acknowledges his slaveness to sin.
Right.
And cries for mercy. He acknowledges his standing,
Yeah.
And it says he wouldn't even lift up his eyes. So that's an important detail, I think,
Right.
that I want to point out. So let me see. Let me consult my notes. The Pharisee who pronounced judgment on others and trusted in his own righteousness to justify himself versus a tax collector who acknowledged his own inability to justify himself and cried for mercy. Jesus tells us the tax collector who was unwilling to lift up his eyes was justified, and the one who exalts himself will be humbled, and the one who humbles himself will be exalted. And in Matthew 7, 1-2, we don't have to go there, but Jesus says not to judge or we will be judged, and the measure that we judge, that's the measure by which we will be judged.
Right.
So, I just wanted to...
It sounds like something we should probably take a little bit seriously.
Yeah, it does.
I do, at least.
So, I just wanted to say all of that. I know that took some time, but I just wanted to set all of that up, like, just to set up as a sort of, like...
Right.
This is all going on. This should be in our minds as we're reading this parable, I think.
Yeah.
It's important to keep all this in mind.
Yeah. All that makes sense to me.
All right, so let's get into it then.
All right.
This is going to be like a 7-hour podcast.
Yeah. Is it really?
I don't know. We're already an hour in,
Oh, man.
so we better get to it.
Are we reading this thing?
Yeah, let's do it.
There was a rich man, or hold on first. Let me say we are in Luke 16. It starts in verse 19.
Yep.
There was a rich man who dressed in purple garments and fine linen and dined sumptuously each day. And lying at his door was a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who would gladly have eaten his fill of the scraps that fell from the rich man's table. Dogs even used to come and lick his sores.
Do you have anything in that section that you want, or do you want to just read the whole thing and then go back?
Yeah, let's read the whole thing first.
Okay, let's do it.
All right, so verse 22. When the poor man died, he was carried away by angels to the bosom of Abraham. The rich man also died and was buried. And from the netherworld, where he was in torment, he raised his eyes and saw Abraham far off and Lazarus at his side. And he cried out, Father Abraham, have pity on me. Send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am suffering torment in these flames. Abraham replied, My child, remember that you received what was good during your lifetime, while Lazarus, likewise, received what was bad. But now he is comforted here, whereas you are tormented. Moreover, between us and you a great chasm is established to prevent anyone from crossing who might wish to go from our side to yours or from your side to ours. He said, Then I beg you, Father, send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, so that he may warn them, lest they too come to this place of torment. But Abraham replied, They have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them. He said, Oh no, Father Abraham, but if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent. And Abraham said, If they will not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded if someone should rise from the dead.
Yeah. So, we haven't really, we did the Jonah one, so I don't know how we want to do this, but I had I just made notes on various scriptures throughout there.
Yeah, well, the first, I guess, I'll just start. I'll just
Okay.
dig right in and start. So the first thing that I thought was pretty cool, and again, I've already said in previous episodes that I'm not smart enough to make up my own stuff, so most of the good stuff that I say comes from somebody else. But no, I was actually, this morning, while I was on the treadmill doing all those countless miles, I was trying to find stuff to watch. I was on YouTube, and I come across this guy. And I don't even remember his name, but he's an Orthodox.
Yeah.
I don't know what they're called. Priests? Are they priests?
I don't know enough about it to say for sure.
Yeah, I don't know either way. But allegedly, he was giving the Orthodox view of this parable, which I don't know, like you, I don't know enough about to know if he has the authority to say that or not. But one thing that he mentioned that I thought was really cool is that he mentioned the name Lazarus being a proper name and how that's the only parable that gives somebody a proper name. And he said that the Orthodox teaching of this is that that's supposed to make it more real. Like this isn't something. This is applicable to life. Like now, this is real life. This is a person that we're talking about.
Yeah.
And like his focus was on the seemed to be on the side of like caring for the poor and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But like the giving of Lazarus, giving him a name makes it more personable. Right? You don't just see some kind of straw man built up, but it's a real person.
Right.
I thought that was cool.
Yeah.
I also thought that it's jumping all the way down to the bottom, but I thought it was really cool. I don't know that there's anything to it at all. And I know that there's been debate about Lazarus, and everybody knows the story in John about Lazarus being raised from the dead. But I just thought it was so cool that there's only one parable where a name was given. And then at the very end down here, he's talking about like, if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent. And Abraham said, if they will not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded if someone should rise from the dead.
Yeah.
Well, like in John, Lazarus is the dude that was raised from the dead.
Right.
So I just thought that was a cool connection. Again, that's one of those things where there's always been are they the same or what? I don't know. But
yeah.
I just thought it was cool because it's almost to me like he's saying, because I think about it like when we talked about in Jonah, right? Like you might hear one thing. Jonah heard something, but he heard that Nineveh was going to be destroyed, but he said, I knew this was going to happen.
Yeah.
But because you're slow to anger and you're merciful and you're just. So, like, even though, like, when I read that at the bottom down here of Rich Man and Lazarus about how he says if they won't listen to Moses and the prophets, well, they're not going to be persuaded by someone that's risen from the dead either. And then what does he do? He does it anyway.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to give you every opportunity. Like, I'm not going to ever give up. I'm going to keep pursuing, right? Like we talked about in the songs last week, his love does not relent.
Yeah.
Right? It's overwhelming. Like he's not going to stop. So even if he says, I'm not going to send somebody back from the dead because they're not going to listen to they won't listen to Moses and the prophets. They're not going to listen to it. Guess what? He did it anyway. Still did it.
Yeah. And they still didn't listen. So,
but he's tried.
He tried. Yeah. That is interesting. Yeah, I mean, again, I don't know. Like you said, I don't know that that's what we're supposed to take from it.
Right.
But it is interesting.
Yeah.
It's an interesting connection for sure.
At least that's what that was when I read through it. Because what I do when I try to study something like this, I try to read through it for myself first without any kind of commentary or watching videos or listening to podcasts. I just read through it, try to come to my own stuff first. And then after I've got like what I think I've got going on here, I go to other sources like commentaries or videos on YouTube and podcasts and try to get other sources to like bounce ideas off of what I've already, but I try to do my own thing first. And when I did my own thing, that was the one thing that stood out to me first before like I read or, was like, because I'd always kind of looked at the name Lazarus and thought it was weird that there was Lazarus and then Lazarus and John, and they don't seem to be the same person.
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, the description is different, right? Because the rich man the Lazarus was a rich man, the one that is in this parable in Luke 16, Lazarus is poor,
right?
But Lazarus that gets raised from the dead is actually a rich dude, right?
I don't remember if it said he was rich or not, but he wasn't poor sitting outside the city gates getting his wounds licked by dogs.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, for sure. But one thing that I had, like from the very beginning, was, like how it's describing what the rich man wore.
Purple garments and fine linens.
Fine linens. So this would have, from what I understand, this would have been fairly common garb for the Pharisees. Purple and fine linen.
I just assumed they were Minnesota Vikings fans.
But either way, obviously this is the dress of someone who is rich.
Yeah.
Someone who maybe loves money.
I'm sure the purple has some sort of significance there. I don't know. I'd always associated or maybe I'd heard this somewhere. I don't know why I've always associated purple with like royalty.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
I don't know if that's what he's trying to get at here, but
maybe, or at least like you have the false assumption of royalty,
right.
perhaps, probably. And then in verse 20, where it brings Lazarus into the story, Lazarus is Greek for Eliezer.
Right. Yeah, let's do that one because I got that one too.
Okay. Well, do you want to go ahead and say what you have on it?
No, I mean you can go ahead. You were already rolling.
I mean, we're probably gonna have the same things on it. That's why I said that. Lazarus is Greek for Eliezer, who was Abraham's Gentile servant, and he would have been heir to Abraham's estate or whatever,
right?
If it wasn't for Isaac.
Yeah, I mean, I actually got it written down here. Did you want to go to Genesis where it's in?
We can. Is it 15?
Yeah, it's 15. Genesis 15. I think that this is an important one to read too because it's kind of puts what you're saying into life, really.
Mm-hmm.
So 15, I'll just start at verse 1. Sometime after these events, this word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Fear not, Abram, I am your shield. I will make your reward very great. But Abram said, O Lord God, what good will your gifts be if I keep on being childless and have as my heir the steward of my house, Eliezer? Abram continued, See, you have given me no offspring, and so one of my servants will be my heir. Then the word of the Lord came to him, No, that one shall not be your heir. Your own issue shall be your heir. So, again, going back, Eliezer, God says here, Eliezer will not be your heir.
Right.
Verse 5, he took him outside and said, Look up at the sky and count the stars if you can. Just so, he added, shall your descendants be. So, anyway, point was, in reading all that, was that Eliezer was Abram's servant, and God specifically said, Eliezer will not be your heir.
Yeah. I think it's right there, too, where it says that you already closed it up.
I can find it in no time. I'm so good at this.
Isn't it directly after this, though, that where God tells him to go out and look up at the stars, and he...
Yeah, I just read that. Were you not listening to me? I
was reading my notes. Sorry. Did you really just read that?
Yeah, I read that.
My bad.
Yeah, it was the very next one. He said, this is verse 5. He took him outside and said, Look up at the sky and count the stars if you can. Just so, he added, shall your descendants be.
What does it say after that?
Abram put his faith in the Lord, who credited it to him as an act of righteousness. He then said to him, I am the Lord who brought you up from Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land as a possession. O Lord God, he asked, how am I to know that I shall possess it? He answered him, bring me a 3-year-old heifer, a she-goat, pigeon, all these rando animals. But yeah.
Well, I was just curious because I know that, he says that it's through Abraham's seed that all the nations, like the covenant that he made with Abraham, that God made with Abraham, he says that it's through Abraham's seed, every family and all the nations of the earth will be blessed.
Mm-hmm.
So I made note of that because Lazarus or Eliezer was a Gentile, and he wasn't the heir. But through Jesus, through the seed of Abraham, that would be a blessing to every family and every nation of the earth, all nations, including Syria, where Damascus was, because that's where Eliezer was from. He's from Damascus. He was a Gentile. So even though he was rejected for the purposes of, like, you might say election here, for the purpose of the covenant.
Yeah.
Eliezer was rejected here, but ultimately he's at Abraham's bosom and is blessed through Jesus and through the seed of Abraham.
Right.
Right. So,
which then he became an heir.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. 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 So he's told he's not an heir, but then he becomes an heir.
Right.
Through Christ. And I do think it's interesting because, like, Jesus, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, right? He's from Judah. I I don't think I had this in my notes yet, but in there it says that because Judah had 5 brothers.
Did he?
So does the rich man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually had heard something else about the 5 brothers, but it's more of this is a completely different direction, but there was someone, I don't remember who it was, who had interpreted this as a sort of a subtle attack upon the high priest.
Yeah.
What was his name? Was it Caiaphas?
Caiaphas?
Yeah. And because he had 5 brothers.
Oh.
So they were like,
that's interesting. That is interesting. Yeah. Because Judah had 5 brothers. He has like a bunch of half brothers, I think.
Uh-huh.
But he, like full brothers, he only had 5, and the rich man has 5. So I thought that was an interesting. Because if Judah, if it's through Judah that, that through Abraham, that seed, if that continues like through the seed of Abraham or whatever, I just think that's interesting. That like, if the Pharisees obviously viewed Abraham as their father, right?
Right.
So like maybe the rich man in this story is supposed to be a representative of Judah.
Yeah.
Maybe, but I don't know that.
I just think
it's interesting.
When I read that, because I never knew that Lazarus was the Greek rendering of Eleazar. And when I read that in study for this, like the whole thing, like it almost is impossible for me to read this now and not think that specific example that we just read from Genesis 15 is precisely what he's calling back to here. Because Eleazar also, or Lazarus, whichever one you want to use, he's outside the gates, right?
Yeah.
He's not the heir. He's the poor man. Like, it doesn't say in Genesis that he's, like, in this low position that Lazarus is in the parable.
Yeah.
But I think that's just making the story, like...
I mean, he is a servant, though.
Right. Which gets to the end, right, or in the story, when the rich man is like, hey, Abraham, tell your servant, tell Lazarus to dip his finger in the water and cool my tongue off, right? Like, he's even in the netherworld, as this Bible puts it, he's still viewing Lazarus or Eleazar as a servant. Like, he doesn't even recognize that. So that to me, like, if Jesus is calling on the story in Genesis 15 of Abraham and Eleazar, it makes sense that he would see Abraham and Eleazar beside him and say, hey, send your servant to fetch me some water.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing we're kind of all over the place in the story.
Yeah, we are.
So I'm trying to figure out the best way to because I had some stuff on that, but I'm trying to find. But
I didn't have any kind of organization to this. I'm just riffing. I'm freestyling all this.
Well, so if we go back up to the beginning of the parable, well, the first mention of Lazarus, like I said, that it could be Eliezer. We've already talked about that. But the next thing it says about him is that it talks about him having sores, and that he's outside the gate.
Ew.
Ew. So here, what I wrote in my notes was, I guess if you had like an open wound, if you had like sores, you weren't able to enter into the temple.
Seems right.
So you would have to stay outside. So inside the temple, is where they had these feasts, these parties, right?
So you're telling me he was unclean?
He was unclean, and so they had to stay outside. If you had sores, you couldn't go inside the gate. You had to stay outside the gate, while everyone else participated in the feasts.
Seems like I remember a story.
Yeah.
Where if the people outside the gates were unclean, they could wash and come inside. I don't know.
Yeah.
Sounds familiar.
And that's exactly what I made note of. I said this brings to mind Revelation 22:15. The New Jerusalem's gates are never shut, and there's an invitation to drink freely from the waters of life and wash your robes. And this, invitation is issued presumably to those outside the gate, which are a whole list of different types of people, including the dogs, if you remember that.
Yep.
And Lazarus is outside the gate with the dogs.
Right.
And yet he finds himself in paradise in Abraham's bosom.
And it makes it seem like, knowing that Jesus is telling this to the Pharisees, and again, it's an assumption that you have to make, is that because he's talking to the Pharisees, he's relating them to the rich man.
Yeah.
Right. So like you would also expect the Pharisees, who are strict by the book, like clean, unclean, rule followers, like this guy's unclean. How can you let this guy in the city? How can you let him in? He's dirty. He's unclean. This isn't right. This is against our law.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And then I also made note here that dogs is also a reference to Gentiles.
Yeah, that's when I read the dogs thing. It made me remember that time where the lady was talking to Jesus, and she was, said something about even the dogs eat the scraps that fall.
Yeah, it's in Matthew 15:27. The dogs eat the crumbs from the master's table.
Yeah,
even the dogs eat the crumbs from the master's table. Which Lazarus was trying to just get the crumbs from the rich man's table.
Specifically says that, he would have gladly eaten his fill of the scraps that fell from the rich man's table.
Yeah. So that there's too many like things calling back to other parts of Scripture to not think that they're supposed to be tied together somehow.
Right.
You know?
You would think.
You would think so, yeah. So I thought this was interesting too. What's verse 22 say?
When the poor man died, he was carried away by angels to the bosom of Abraham. The rich man also died and was buried.
Okay. So to say that Lazarus was in Abraham's bosom, so in my research for this, it was common of that time, like whenever you would dine, whenever you would go to eat, you would recline, quote unquote, recline at the table. And so what that looked like apparently was you would take your left arm, and your left arm you would lean forward on your like left elbow, I guess, with your feet stretched out behind, and your right hand was like just kind of free, I guess, like to the side. So you're kind of like leaning sideways, sort of like this. So the person to your right hand, the person on the right hand side of you, is doing that same thing, and it looks as if they are in your, like, leaning on your bosom, on your chest.
Yeah.
So I guess that's where that term, like, probably comes from. Like, and
it's funny enough that has something to do with sitting at the table, because when I read it, what it made me think of was the Last Supper, the painting of the Last Supper, which I know it's not it's just a painting, it's not a scripture or whatever, but like it's famous for having the disciple lean up against Jesus's chest, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's John. Yeah, supposedly, right?
I think that's. I don't know. I didn't say that because I wasn't sure what that's based on, but I'd always heard that was John.
Pretty sure. So yeah, so like the person on your right hand is and Jesus is said to be at the bosom of the Father, right? Well, Jesus is also he's seated at the right hand of God,
right?
So that connection of being on the right hand side and being in the bosom of someone else, I think that's interesting here, and I think it even further drives home that point that maybe this is Eliezer,
right,
reclining at the table with his master,
right,
Abraham.
And man, it just makes me think about how, I don't know how to put it and not sound like an idiot, but how big of a deal sharing a meal was to people. Yeah. And I think that we miss out on this so much because our society has changed so much. And like, we have food whenever we want it. Like, I know that there are hungry people even here in our area, even in the USA. Like, I know that there are hungry people, but like for the most part, most people in America get food. It's not that hard to get like food. Like the point I'm trying to make is we have food. We have an abundance of food. It's readily available. Yeah. But in this time, a meal was like a sacred thing, right? Like you might not know when you're going to eat again. Yeah. So like when they came together and supped together, it was such an intimate thing, and I feel like that's something that we miss out on, and that's what I was thinking about when you were talking about that, because I didn't know that about the laying at the table and like how that ties into all this, like, because it all ties back to like that communion, right? Like that the communion of sharing a meal with like the ones that you love.
Yeah.
And I guess it makes sense in a way, because like that's how we live. Like that's how we sustain our being, is by food and by eating. And I don't know, man. It's just it gives it that intimate element.
Yeah.
That I didn't know was there, I guess.
Yeah, which is why, because if we back up to, because again, this is a continuation of Luke 15. If we back up to the beginning, before he tells the parables of the lost coin, the lost sheep, and the prodigal son in Luke 15, the Pharisees are ticked that he's eating with the sinners.
Right.
He's sharing a meal with the sinners and tax collectors, and the Pharisees are ticked about it. And that's what prompts Jesus to tell these stories.
Right. So if being in Abraham's bosom has anything to do with what you're saying,
with sharing a meal, possibly,
then
feast.
That is
marriage
almost
supper.
a direct one-for-one comparison, right? Like, he's if the rich man is represented by the Pharisees, or vice versa, then he's like literally saying, like, you're getting onto me for supping with the sinners, but they're the ones that are sitting at the table with me.
Yeah.
You're on the outside.
Right. Yeah. Well, he says in the Sermon on the Mount, he says that your righteousness has to
exceed
that of the Pharisees and the scribes. So, I mean, I think that is applicable. I think that's something to pay attention to here for sure. That, like, maybe he's saying outright to these Pharisees, you think you guys are getting in, but the people that sitting at this table with me right now, are getting in before you. Which
that to me is literally what that whole Sermon on the Mount is. Which that's where that comes from. What you were saying, that's Matthew 5, like what 20, 22, something, like it's in that.
Yeah.
But it's the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. So he says, like, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the Pharisees.
Yeah.
But then he goes on to say, like, give the famous ones, like, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, but I say. So, like, when he says that, he's giving law that the Pharisees follow to a T.
Yeah.
And then the whole point is they follow the law, but they're missing something.
Yeah.
And that one something is love.
Yeah.
They're not doing it with love. It's all about the intent. It's not about following the commands. It's about the intent behind following the commands, right? And so that's how the righteousness exceeds the Pharisees, which you see in the story, in the parable that we're reading today, our topic for today.
Yeah.
Right? Because if the rich man is representing the Pharisees, he didn't have any compassion.
Yeah.
Like he may have, we don't know from this story, but for all we know, maybe it's like the rich man who asked Jesus, how does he inherit eternal life? And he's like, I've done all the commandments.
Right.
Maybe this guy is following all the commandments, but there's one thing he wasn't doing.
Yeah.
Apparently, he's not even given scraps, because it says outright that Lazarus would have gladly eaten his fill of the scraps from the rich man's table.
Right.
So not only did the rich man have an abundance, but he wouldn't even spare scraps. He wouldn't even spare crumbs. So he might have been a law follower, but he wasn't doing it out of love.
Right.
So therefore,
which is the whole heart of the law. It's all based in love. I don't know. We don't have to get into all that, but
then you really get me going. You brought up the Sermon on the Mount. That'll completely derail me.
So the last thing I mentioned was on verse 22. Verse 23 says this: in Hades he lifted up his eyes.
Oh, yeah.
In Hades, the rich man lifted up his eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Which, going back to what I just read, the comparison Jesus made,
or the prayer
in that parable between the prayer of the Pharisee and the prayer of the tax collector. The Pharisee says, "I'm glad I'm not like this guy." The Pharisee said, "I'm glad I'm not like this tax collector."
Right.
The tax collector said, "Have mercy on me, a sinner," and it said he would not. lift up his eyes.
Right. Which is like indicating to me that he's ashamed.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I don't know that that's what he's saying, but that's what I get from it. Like because think about like if you're talking to your father and you like think about when you were a kid and you did something wrong and you knew it and your dad was like confronting you about it, like you're not going to look up into his eyes, like you're looking down at his feet because you're ashamed. Like
conviction might be a word for it.
Yeah.
So I think that's interesting. He in Hades he lifted up his eyes, being in torment, and saw Abraham far away, and Lazarus in his bosom. So the couple notes that I had on verse 23 there, it says Hades, which we already talked about in our hell episode. Hades is not hell.
Right.
Hell's nowhere in the Bible, actually.
This one says netherworld, and I love it, and I'm just going to call it that from now
on. But the Greek word is Hades, and it's so it's the place of the dead, right? So it's the New Testament equivalent to Sheol,
which
isn't hell,
right? And I'm not a scholar in Greek mythology by any scope of the scope, but my understanding is that in Hades there are both. It's both. There are places of, I don't know if pleasure is the right word, but there's a good place, and then there are places in Hades of suffering too. Like,
yeah. So, but we know that death and hell is how it's translated, but death and Hades are cast into the lake of fire.
Preach that.
So whatever Hades is, it isn't the final place of the dead. The lake of fire would be, presumably. Right. So we could actually, if all we were trying to do with this parable was talk about how it doesn't talk about eternal torment, we can just shut her down right now, as far as I'm concerned, because Jesus says specifically this is Hades, and Hades is cast into the lake of fire. Death and Hades are cast into the lake of fire. So whatever the lake of fire is, that's what we're talking about. So I don't think that the fact that this is Hades, I don't think that this is the lake of fire, because it can't be. I don't see how it can be the lake of fire, because this place is cast into the lake of fire, and that's the second death.
Is there really anything else in the Bible? Like, I know that there are a lot of other examples, but is there anything that probably has been more confusing to people than the translation of the word Hades, Sheol, and the like? As hell.
Know.
Like
Gehenna,
the translation of the words
Tartarus.
that are, because, and especially like, I know in the King James Bible, like there are specific times when the same word is translated, like if the word Sheol in the Old Testament is used in like a good way or a positive way, it's translated as the grave or the pit. But if it sounds bad, they translated it as hell. It's literally the same word.
Yeah, it's the same word
in Hebrew. But it was the translators made the decision to translate it, and then we read it in English and don't know that.
Yeah.
So then that completely changes your conception of everything.
Yeah, especially if you don't ever take the time to look into those things. Because, I mean, I know a lot of people do that. A lot of people just read it, and they don't even bother themselves with, like, going and looking at the actual words. Right. The Hebrew and Greek words used, and like...
And it's a weird thing, because I know I talked to you about this a little bit the other day, where, like, I personally understand that, and so I do look into the original languages some, but I also I recognize that I don't speak those languages. I've not ever studied those languages.
Yeah.
And so I'm almost worried in studying them, because it's anybody that's ever done it and used your Strong's lexicon or whatever to look up the words. There's so many definitions listed there that any single word you look up, you're going to find one that fits whatever narrative you want to make it say. Almost like, you're gonna find one of the words that fits in there that you're just like, oh man, that one's a heavy hitter. That one is good. Now I've got this secret knowledge. It's not really secret, but you know what I mean? Like, it's hidden in the word, and you found it.
Yeah.
And then, like, to me, I'm afraid that I'm reading what I want to into it.
Yeah, but I mean, that's a danger for sure, yeah.
But you also need to do that kind of research because of this hell thing. Like, it is a perfect example.
I don't know what you do about that. I definitely see the issue that you're talking about. But I still think I would rather know. Like, I think I would rather know that there's not consistency in the way the word's translated than to just not ever think about it.
Well, I think it is a little bit different, I think, for like that specific example, because you can look at it and say, sometimes it's translated this way, sometimes it's translated this way, sometimes it's translated this third way, this fourth way, and then I don't necessarily, because I'm not an expert in language, I don't know for sure what it says, but I know that even the experts aren't sure because they're translating it different ways.
Right, yeah.
Now, like when I come across a word that is like, it appears in the scriptures X amount of times and it's been translated as that word every single time, sure, I can open up the Strongs and find something that makes me think, man, maybe there's some kind of hidden meaning in here that I'm finding, but like, if everybody's that our actual experts are translating it one way, that's probably the right way, more than likely.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I also do wonder though sometimes, like because translators, they are interpreting,
right?
You know, so like if you already, because of a previous translation of the Bible you've read,
right,
it translated it this way. If you think that that's the interpretation, if that fits the interpretation. You know what I mean? Like I just feel like there's no one that approaches that without bias already.
For sure. It's just it's a very weird thing, because then I think about it through like, I mean, like my mind goes to like, I don't even like to use the example, but I'm going to say it anyway. Like my mind goes to like conspiracy theory stuff, right? Because to me, that's what people that get sucked into conspiracy theories do. Like all the experts on the theories, like. Or all the experts like are saying one thing, but me, an uneducated person, opened a book and like now I'm smarter than everybody. Like I know what it says. But I get the argument for the other side. It's just it's a hard thing. Again, I said the word because after Wednesday night's Bible study, we were talking and somebody had mentioned something that's hard, and I pointed to the Bible and I said, "There's nothing in here that ever said it was easy."
Yeah.
So.
Yeah,
that's a tangent. We just went off on a tangent, but that's a good tangent, I think. Like, translations, that's a tricky one. It's a good episode.
Yeah,
we already talked about the Bible some, but I think that's obviously something that we could revisit. And
yeah, maybe we can have Andrew on for that one. I know he likes to talk about different translations and stuff like that. So
I think we're about ready for a guest.
Yeah, I think we are. So one other note that I already mentioned that, whatever Hades is, it's cast into the lake of fire. So
she gone.
So she gone. Whatever that is, it's not the final resting place of the dead. The lake of fire would be. So I also mentioned that the rich man here is taking up the exact opposite posture of the tax collector, in that it says he lifted up his eyes, versus the tax collector in the prayer we read earlier from Luke 18. It says he would not lift up his eyes.
And I want to make one more mention on that point.
Okay.
Because it made me think about, I mentioned before, like the tax collector wouldn't look up, and to me that speaks of shame. But what does it mean if you're looking eye to eye with somebody?
It means you're equal.
Yeah, you at least view yourself as equal. You're like, I am, in nature especially, it's more so in like, I guess the animal kingdom, or probably like more primitive cultures. But like if you like, I know dogs, for example, like they don't like eye to eye because like it's a dominance thing, right? Like if you're looking me in the eye, what you're saying is that you're equal to me. You are you're up here with me. Like as a sign of respect, you don't look eye to eye with somebody that you're under. And to me, it goes back to at the very beginning when we talked about the purple garments, and purple, like we've always associated with and heard it being associated with royalty. And you said, at least they're in their own mind, they are.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I get at whenever I read, or get out whenever I read they looked up. It's the opposite of being like the tax collector, whereas the tax collector was looking down in reverence.
Mm-hmm.
They're looking up saying, no, I am righteous. I've made myself righteous. I am equal to you now. Right. Remember going back to Genesis in the garden, since you brought that up earlier. Yeah. Like what did the serpent tell them if would happen if they ate of the tree?
What did the serpent tell them?
Or it wasn't the serpent. It was what God said after they'd eaten them. They'd eaten the fruit, and God said, now they're like us.
Yeah, now they've become like us, knowing good and evil.
Right.
Which is interesting, right? We're going to have to talk about that at some point.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Because it doesn't, he says, they have become like us, knowing good and evil. Which then, if we don't know the difference between good and evil, kind of makes God sound like a liar in Genesis. Just right off the bat, he's just lying.
Didn't even make it out of the first little bit.
So, yeah, I don't know. Anyway.
But anyway, the point is, the reason why I brought that up is I was trying to create the parallel between being equals with God in our own eyes and looking God, casting our gaze up. Looking up to me means looking God eye to eye, saying, I am your equal.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think that's a good note to make. The only other thing I wanted to make mention of in verse 23 there was the word torment. It is the Greek word bazanos, which we talked about in our Revelation
Sounds
series.
Like one you just made up, to be honest.
And it does mean it. If you look up the word, it does mean to torture. But it originally meant to test the purity of precious metals. To test the purity of precious metals. So the thing being tested is precious. Right?
Allegedly.
Also read in the I think it's a couple different things. Thayer, Greek lexicon, the Strong's. I don't remember which this came from, but it said that sickness was regarded as torture. Sickness.
I've been so sick it's been torture before. I know that.
Right. Which is interesting because you and I have both talked about on this podcast how you viewing sin as a sickness.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So sin itself can be a torture.
Yeah. If you view, I think that most people, even the people that are in it, would say like drug addiction probably is a result of a sinful thing.
Yeah.
I think even the people that are in it would tell you, yeah,
it's pretty torturous. Yeah. Yeah. So, verse 24, I had some notes on 24 as well. Can you read that?
He cried out, Father, Abraham, have pity on me. Send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am suffering torment in these flames.
Yeah.
In flames.
Yeah.
My mind goes to the band.
Right.
That's my high school days.
Yeah. Which, I think that this is interesting because it does bring to mind, where is God in this scenario? Where is God? Because Abraham is the authority figure, and he's crying out to Abraham, to Father Abraham. Mm-hmm. He's crying out to Abraham for mercy and not God. Mm-hmm. He doesn't cry out to God. Again, in comparison to, the tax collector who Jesus said was justified whenever he prayed, Father, God have mercy on me, a sinner. Here, the rich man's crying out to Abraham. He's not crying out to God. He's crying out to his tradition.
And you know what he's also saying here? He's not saying, I messed up. He's saying, have pity on me.
Yeah.
He's saying, hey, help me out.
Right. Yeah.
There's no acknowledgement of
right.
Of my role in this. Essentially,
he's unrepentant.
Yeah, I guess that's probably the better way to put it.
So this section also reminded me of John 8, which we already read earlier. The Pharisees identify as children of Abraham, right? But as the Jews themselves in John 8, as they point out, Abraham died just like the prophets and everyone else. The only one who could set free and who was able to defeat death stood right in front of them, and they weren't able to recognize it. Jesus said, "You don't hear my words." The Pharisees saw Abraham as an authority figure who they apparently viewed as having more authority than Jesus. So maybe that's why Abraham is the authority figure here in this parable. Mm-hmm. Because according to John 8, they're viewing Abraham as an authority figure that has more authority than Jesus.
Right.
Who is the only one who actually could cross that chasm. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So what the what the rich man viewed as mercy to him was putting Lazarus to work.
Yeah.
It was, yeah. He was trying to. He's again, like we said already. He's unrepentant. He's still viewing Lazarus as having a lower position than him.
Right.
He still views himself as superior.
Yeah, that's one of the things that always stands out to me right from the bat is like even in being tormented and tortured and being dead, still has a higher view of himself.
Yeah.
Than Lazarus.
Yeah. So one thing. Huh? Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think that to me, where the Abraham thing comes in is it really, because I had read some other people had said this too, but I'd read, because Jesus is talking to Jewish people here, right? He's talking to Pharisees,
yeah,
and kind of read this as a potentially a telling of, and it really actually kind of blew me away when you read that about the Pharisees saying that they were children of Abraham.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Because I didn't know you were going to read that, and this is kind of goes along with this point that I'd written down, which is like it could be a story of the Jewish people rejecting Jesus, and the Gentiles embracing Jesus, and I kind of tied in that with the story that we'd already talked about Eleazar, right? Because he was the Gentile and he's at the bosom of Abraham. And but the reason I bring it up here is because that's, to me, why Abraham is used, is because he's the father of the Jewish people, right? Or the father of the Hebrews. And so they viewed themselves as children of Abraham. And what we find out, Jesus goes on to teach that the true children of Abraham are the people, that are believers in him. Yeah. So even though the Pharisees were Jewish people and they thought they were children of Abraham, the true children of Abraham, the ones that were actually, and this is probably a wrong way to view it, but when I read in the bosom of Abraham, I think about a hug, right? Because that's what happens when you hug someone, is you're in their bosom, like, right. Especially if it's somebody bigger than you, right? Like, think about a little kid being hugged by their dad. Like, it's right here in the bosom, like, right. And so that's what I think about when I read this, is it's like potentially a story of the Jewish people rejecting. And I don't say that in like an anti-Semitic way, because like I resonate with that myself. We all, just like we are all Pharisees at some point in our life, we've all been Pharisees and we all will be again. Like, so I'm not trying to pick on the Jewish people or whatever, but I think that could be, and that's not like something that I just made up. Like, it is a well-known interpretation of this. Yeah.
Yeah. So he cries out to the only one who can't change his position. Like, he's crying out to Abraham, and Abraham can't change him. Abraham can't change his condition. The only one who could is Jesus, who they are, right before this, they're like, man, I cannot believe this guy. Can you believe this guy eating with these sinners? Can you believe that? They're the only one in this story that can change the rich man. He's not crying out to. He's crying out to Abraham. I thought it was interesting that it said his tongue specifically is what needed cooling off.
Sounds to me like he needs to watch his language.
Exactly. Because it's in James 3:6, right?
Because the tongue is a world of iniquity.
Yeah. The tongue is set on fire by Gehenna, is what it says. Yeah. The tongue is set on fire by Gehenna. You have to watch what you're saying, So
say the two guys that are talking into microphones.
Right, exactly. And that's not lost on us. But so I thought that was interesting, that if your tongue can be set on fire of Gehenna, and it's the power of life and death are in the tongue, and if we're talking about showing love to the other, the like what you're saying about yourself, like the guy in the prayer, the rich man, what he said to himself, the Pharisee in the prayer, I'm glad I'm not like this guy.
Right.
Glad I'm not like this cat. He's judging him, right? So I just thought that was interesting that it specifically said his tongue is what needed.
Yeah, that is interesting. I never really paid that much attention to that, but I like it.
Yeah. It also says that he's in agony in this flame, which it's singular. Flame, singular, not flames, plural.
That's
which
interesting.
I think is interesting.
Because this version actually says, I am suffering torment in these flames.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I don't know what it would be.
Oh, maybe I'm just wrong on that. But I thought that it was specifically...
well, I mean, I don't know anything about this translation. I have about 75 Bibles, and this is the one I picked up.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure in the translation that I have here, where are we even at? Verse 24?
24, yep.
Yeah, that's what this one says. This is the NASB, the 1995
NASB?
translation. NASB. Yeah, it says, "Cool off my tongue, for I am in agony in this flame." So that word agony, I looked up the definition for it. It's pretty interesting. It says very painful sorrow, to experience intense emotional pain, deep personal anguish expressed by great mourning.
I think my hands were in Gehenna or Hades this morning when I was running. Every single one of these words that you're using was applicable to the way my hands felt running in that 5-degree weather.
Consuming sorrow.
Yep, that's it. That's the one.
Yeah. That's interesting, right? Because I don't know. I mean, weeping and gnashing of teeth is what that reminds me of. Like, it doesn't, in agony, because I don't think that the flame is literal, right?
Yeah, of course.
So I think that that is the type of suffering that he's experiencing here. It's a sorrow. He's not literally burning alive, his flesh melting off his bones.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's a deep emotional, like sorrowful type of pain.
Yeah, I mean, I just imagine it like this, going back to the example of Father Abraham and like that embrace of the father.
Yeah.
Like, if you've lived your entire life thinking you're the son of Abraham that's going to be in his embrace, and then you come to find out not only are you not, but this bum that you've seen every day is.
That's going to cause some sorrow.
That's a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's also interesting, in Deuteronomy 32:22, it says that the fire of God's wrath reaches to Sheol, or Hades, right? Hades is the Greek equivalent to Sheol. The fire of God's wrath reaches to Hades. So, for me, God's wrath is aimed at, what is God's wrath towards? What is it aimed at? I think it's aimed at anything in you that is not Christ-like, right?
Yeah.
That's what God's wrath is aimed at.
That's how I would frame it.
Yeah. It's aimed at the false self, the stuff that we make ourselves into by believing the lies of the enemy that we need to justify ourselves. Or even worse, that we can justify ourselves, which is, I think, what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly.
If you think you have a list of rules that you can follow, and you are successful in following those rules, well, then you're holy. You did it.
Yeah.
Then you can look down your nose at everyone else, right? It creates a sort of elitist mentality.
Way to go for you, pal.
And that sort of elitism, it cannot coexist with love of neighbor and yourself.
Right.
It can't.
Yeah.
And I think maybe this is the flame. Maybe this is the flame that the rich man is experiencing. It's the very wrath of God, the wrath of God that's aimed at that thing in him that refuses to see that Lazarus is an equal to him, that he's not, that he doesn't.
Yeah.
That he, that false self that he's created himself into by trying to follow all these rules and being so lost in, because Jesus tells the Pharisees, you search the scriptures because you think in them you have eternal life.
Right.
But they're pointing to me.
Right.
And you won't come to me.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, what you're saying there to me comes across as the sorrow of, almost in a way, I'm going to say it. I'm going to say the word deconstruction.
Yeah.
Because it's everything that you've built your entire life on.
Yeah, man.
Comes crumbling down around you.
Yeah.
Everything that you thought was the reality, that you thought was true, you get to the end and you find out, oh man, I've put 30 years of my life into this, or more if you're older. Like,
right, yeah.
And then come to find out, I've been wrong. Especially something that, like, I think about it from a perspective of, like, if you're someone who's coming out of one of those traditions that do kind of create that elitist mentality that you're talking about, which is, like, I would argue is the traditions that hold to that sort of holiness code where you're like, look at us, we're different from everybody else, like, because that creates that elitist mentality. When you're coming out of that and deconstructing that, you come to find out that, like, oh man, I've not been treating all these other people right, maybe.
Yeah.
That's where that sorrow comes in, right?
Yeah, man.
So,
I mean, I don't know if you've ever had an experience like this or not, but have you ever had an experience where you felt conviction that was like physically, it caused you physical pain?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Maybe that's what this is. I don't know. That's because I remember, I don't know. I don't know if I even want to tell the story or not, because it's going to sound like I'm making a political statement, and I don't mean to.
Yeah,
if I tell the story.
If there's anybody on this show that's ever going to make a political statement, it's not going to be Sean. And I think everybody knows that.
I just don't care anything about the politics, right? But
I've got much more of a reputation in that field.
But you know what? I'm going to say it anyway because this is my podcast and I can do what I want.
That's exactly right.
But
it's only half yours.
True. But I'm sure you're okay with it.
Oh, yeah.
So this actually was not that long ago. I was listening to Chris Green, and he was doing a Q&A after a series of lectures he did. And because he grew up Pentecostal, right?
Yep.
So he was, I'm going to say one thing and that he said before he said something else. There's two things here.
Okay.
So the first thing he said was that, it was always odd to him that, we would, as a Pentecostal, he would go to church and everyone is speaking in tongues, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can't understand anything anyone is saying, right? And then they would go eat, like we do, go eat Mexican every Sunday after church. He said they would go out and they would eat, and he would hear people from his church saying things like, "Why can't they just speak English?"
Yeah.
Like, you ought to be forced to learn English before you can even step foot in this country, and that that sort of we've heard things like that.
Oh yeah,
ourselves.
I literally heard somebody say that this week. I was standing in line at the dollar store down here at the Dollar General, and some dude was talking to the guy that was behind him in line and said that exact same thing to him.
Yeah. Well, he followed this up, and this is where people might get offended, and I'm not trying to make any sort of political statement, so don't come at me. But he said this, and I will say I have had a lot of. I've never been a super political guy anyway.
Right.
But since I've reconstructed and since I've started actually taking Jesus's words seriously, my politics, any political views I did have, they've changed.
Right.
Not completely, but they have changed.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just want to preface what I'm going to say by saying that. So he goes on to say that apparently it's a large number of immigrants coming across the border identify as evangelical Christians. And of that percentage that do, the majority of them identify as tongue-talking Pentecostals. And he said, how many of us have been at church crying out, begging God, send revival, send revival, send revival, and then went out the doors of the church and said, build that wall, build that wall? What if we're praying for God to send us revival and he's trying to, and we're trying to shut it out?
Right. Yeah.
And when he said that, man, something deep inside of me just like, oh, God.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I repented. It hurt.
Yeah.
It hurt to know that I'd had that sort of mentality, that I was guilty.
Right.
Yeah.
I know the exact feeling. So I mean, not on that necessarily on that exact same one, that exact same topic, but like, and I one specific example comes to my mind, but I'm not comfortable sharing it here because it involves people that we know that would be obvious to people that listen to the show, and I don't really want to give that. But
well, I probably ticked enough people off with what I said.
I mean, I wouldn't be ticking anybody off. I just don't want to put other people out there like that.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, it's based, essentially it is something that I had said that now in hindsight, now that my views, the way that you put it is exactly the way I would say it. It just wasn't a political thing. But yeah,
right.
Now that I take the things that Jesus said seriously, my views on certain things have obviously changed. And that regret, I mean, this particular example happened 15 years ago probably, and I still hold on to it. Like, and that's one of the, I mean, that's a whole nother topic, but like self-forgiveness, man, that's a tough one, is it not?
Forgiving yourself is hard, man.
I guess it's different for everybody else, but like I'm generally a person that is very quick and easy to forgive others. Like I don't hold grudges. I really don't. But then, like, and when I like look internally, man, I do hold grudges. I just hold them against myself. Like, I really have a hard time forgiving myself. I can forgive anybody else of almost anything, but just like without question, I don't even stay mad for a couple minutes and I'm good.
Right. Yeah.
But for myself, like, there's still stuff from my childhood I hold on to, and 15 years ago, and I don't know, but. Anyway, on the point, yes, I absolutely do know what you're talking about.
And here's the thing, I don't know, like, just getting back to the story here, like, if he's in agony, I don't know how that works, because, like, do you have to recognize? Because he's clearly not recognizing his own sinfulness still.
Right.
Which is in the experiences that we're talking about, that it was that realization that caused that that internal sorrow and pain, right? So I don't know.
I think it appears from the story perspective here that his pain is more directed from, at least the way I'm reading the story, his acknowledgement of his position.
That's
You know what I'm saying? Like where he is isn't where he wants to be.
Yeah, okay. So the pain that he is experiencing is coming from, I mean, it's still from his sin.
Yeah.
The sin is what's causing him the pain. It's not the conviction, but it's the sin itself that is the punishment he's receiving. The pain and sorrow that he is feeling, it's possible that that's just a direct result of the sin itself.
Right.
And not the conviction like we were talking about.
I almost think about it from like, say if somebody stole a lottery ticket from an old lady and then he went to cash it in and it wasn't a winner and he was sorrowful, not because he stole the ticket from the lady, but because he didn't win $1 million.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. So I also had something with verse 26. Can you read that for me?
Yeah. Moreover, between us and you, a great chasm is established to prevent anyone from crossing who might wish to go from our side to yours or from your side to ours.
So one thing I thought was interesting that I made note of here is that in the story, nothing is crossing that chasm except what? What is able to cross that chasm? It's the words that they're saying to each other.
Mm-hmm. They can obviously hear each other.
They're communicating with each other. which I think is interesting because how many times did Jesus say in that John 8 section that I read earlier about his word? Yeah. So
I wonder if they could have just tossed some water.
I don't know. I don't. Depends on how far that chasm was, I guess. I don't know. Maybe Abraham had an arm on him. Maybe he could have got it there. I don't know.
I mean, if his bosom was big enough, then he probably did have a cannon.
But anyway, I thought that was interesting that that words, or maybe specifically the word,
yep,
can cross that chasm.
Capital W word.
Capital W. I also thought this was interesting, and maybe I'm reading too much into this, but there was a chasm that the children of Israel had to cross to get from the wilderness to the promised land. When they were brought out of Egypt, they didn't go immediately into the promised land. They went through the wilderness first.
Mm-hmm. And they had to cross the Red Sea to get there.
Yeah.
Is that the chasm you're talking about?
Well, to get into the promised land, so they had to cross the Red Sea to get into the wilderness.
Yeah.
But then they had to cross the Jordan River,
yeah, to
get into the promised land. But like we've talked about in previous episodes, the wilderness, it speaks of testing and trial, right? And even separation. But it also speaks of preparation. Like the children of Israel were being prepared for the promised land in this place of chaos, right? In this place of...
it was chaos for them.
Yeah. It was a place of testing and trial, and but it was a preparation, and it was also a place of revelation. This is where God reveals his character to Moses, right? It's in the wilderness.
It's where they got bit by a bunch of snakes.
Yeah.
That sucks.
It is.
I don't like snakes.
No, definitely not. But it's where the wilderness is also where they can hear his word, right? Jeremiah 23:29 says, "Is not my word like fire?" And it says, declares the Lord, "and like a hammer which shatters a rock." So in this story, the only thing crossing that chasm is words, and the word of the Lord is like fire.
Mm-hmm.
The children of Israel had to cross the Jordan. In Joshua 4, it says that the Lord dried up the water until they crossed over. And here the rich man is asking for water, which I think is interesting.
Let me ask you this. Have you ever... So let me rephrase. Let me start all over. What I'm thinking of here is because you're going with the word of the Lord, crossing the chasm, being like fire, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going back to the agony that the guy's feeling in the flame.
Yeah.
When could the word of the, and obviously the guy's not repenting, right? Because my first thought is, when can the word of the Lord cause agony? Obviously, one example is the one that we gave, the one that you gave. That's a way where you're repentant, right? You're convicted. It convicts you, I guess.
Yeah.
Another thing that I'm wondering about is, because I'm trying to process in my mind, like, when is the word of the Lord agony or causing agony?
Yeah.
And another thing that comes to my mind is, if you're hearing the word of the Lord, but you're shutting it out, you're ignoring it, you're saying, no, that's, you know what I'm saying? Like, you're hearing the truth, but you're ignoring it.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if that's because in the story, he still doesn't get it. So I wonder if perhaps that has something to do with it.
Yeah, could be. I mean, the word is sharper than any two-edged sword, right? That, like, it should cut us to the quick.
Yeah.
It's which can be painful, and it, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know either. It was just a thought. Because, like I said, when I hear when I think about the word of the Lord causing agony, then my thought initially goes to the conviction of it, right? And even the verse that you just gave, the word of the Lord is sharper to any two-edged sword, I've always interpreted that as a conviction. Like, it's cutting me to my core.
Right.
Like, I hear those words and it just cuts me like a knife because, like, I'm so convicted. But this guy doesn't appear to be convicted. So I wonder if it could be something like, because I don't know.
Maybe it's cutting him in a different way.
Yeah.
It's causing him pain because he is rejecting it.
That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Because he's rejecting the word of the Lord, which is exactly what we see over and over again. The Pharisees are rejecting that in the Jews, specifically in that John 8 passage that I told you about. It was saying that they were, they picked up at the end of that section, they pick up stones to try and stone him.
Well, that's, I mean, it goes back to, which I can say it because this will be published after I do Sunday school tomorrow, but like I could say that's what I'm getting out of like Luke 13 too. The first section of it, like there's people, he's talking to Jews and they've asked him about like, well, what about these people who Pilate killed? Like they were offering sacrifices to God, and Pilate killed them and mixed their blood with their own sacrifices. Well, what about them? And then Jesus says, well, they're not any more sinners than anybody else, and if you don't repent, like you're going to perish too. And then gives another example of like the Tower of Siloam falling on 18 people, and then says the same thing. If you don't, and what I was getting out of it was like the first part, the Pilate thing, like they were looking for that eye for an eye revenge.
Yeah.
Right. And he's telling them, if we like look around you and see like the path that we're on, that where is this leading us? And we know what happened in 70 AD. Like it led them right to, so like that word should cut them. Like it's saying, if one way or another, it's going to be agony. You're either going to listen to me and it's going to cut you internally and you're going to be convicted and it's going to cause you to repent, or you're going to suffer the agony that your actions are going to lead to.
Yeah.
Yeah,
because that's another way of conceptualizing the wrath of God is giving you over to the natural consequences of your actions.
And that's what I think. I think that's what he's getting at there when he says that. But and I only say that because like we all know, or I think we all know, like I've always heard that the reason why Jesus wasn't widely recognized as the Messiah was because they were looking for someone who was going to come and free them from the Roman occupation of the time, right?
Right.
Which is why they chose Barabbas over Jesus, because Barabbas was also a Christ figure. It says that he was an insurrectionist who had murdered people in the insurrection. Like he is a Christ figure who's leading rebellions against the Roman Empire. That's the path that the Jewish people decided to take when they chose Barabbas. So I think what Jesus is saying here is that path, like Pilate has given you an example here as to what this leads to. He's killed your people and mixed their blood with the sacrifices.
Yeah.
This path only leads to destruction. It's hard either way. It hurts either way because you're hearing that conviction in you, or you're suffering the real life consequences of ignoring those words, right? So that's what I'm getting at with this guy's perhaps ignoring those words. You know what I'm saying? It causes that also causes agony.
Right. Yeah. And I think that because I think this is important maybe to stop and like, because there may be some people that listen to this episode that didn't listen to the hell episodes, or maybe they listened to the first one and didn't listen to, because there's a lot of people. There's a lot of people that listened to the first episode and didn't listen to the rest of them. But I think as long as you keep that posture, as long as you are unable, as long as the pain that you're experiencing is that, it's the pain of it's not recognizing your position. It's not recognizing, it's not allowing the word to convict you and cause change in you. as long as you're ignoring that and pushing back against that, I don't think you can be saved. I think that is necessary. Yeah.
And it definitely sounds from the examples that we have in the scriptures that if you're not feeling some sort of pain, that might be a problem.
Yeah.
Something might be wrong, right?
Right.
Because the rich man in this parable, he wasn't feeling any pain.
Yeah.
The other guy who was, he ended up in a different spot. You know what I'm saying? Like, and that seems to be the trend all through the Gospels is that when you're not feeling that conviction or you're not feeling any sort of pain, that probably means something's not right with you.
Yeah.
That might be a time to do a little introspection, a little reflection and say, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I know I'm not perfect, so why am I not feeling something here? Like,
so this just came to my mind, and I don't know.
yeah, do it.
I'm just going to flow with it.
Do it.
So, like we mentioned earlier, the idea that the children of Israel were in slavery, and they had to cross the Red Sea. They had to cross a chasm. There was something they had to get over to get past this thing in order for them to get to the wilderness. The wilderness wasn't the promised land, but the wilderness was a testing. It was a trial. It was a path on the way to the promised land, but it wasn't the promised land itself. And then there was another thing that they had to cross. They had to cross the Jordan to get to the promised land. So here's where my mind went whenever we were talking through this just now. If we're like theoretically, as a way of analogy, maybe the rich man having this posture is that he's still in slavery. He's still enslaved to his sin. Again, calling back to John 8, when Jesus said that, if you're a slave to sin, he's still a slave to his sin at this point. There's still something he has to get past, get over, before he can begin the trial period, the testing, the place where he can be transformed to be prepared for crossing over into the promised land. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Because I just don't think God ever stops, right?
Right.
I don't think that he ever stops drawing. In John 12, Jesus says, "If I be lifted up from the earth, I will draw all people to myself," he says.
Right.
So I think that he will. And it may take a long time. I don't know.
Right.
Well,
and I think what makes that one hard, what makes it hard is because it does say in verse 26 that chasm is there, and it's been the whole point of it. It was established to prevent anyone from crossing who might wish to go from our side to yours or from. So it seems to indicate that there's no way across this.
Yeah,
there is no way. But I do recall a verse in the Bible that says, "With God, all things are possible."
Yeah, exactly.
And actually, that
coming from the mouth of Jesus.
Not only is it from the mouth of Jesus, but it was in response because I'm pretty sure, is this not when he says that it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than a rich
man?
And then the disciples said, "Well, then how can anybody be saved?" And God said, "With God, Jesus said, with God, all things are possible."
Yep. The Word said, "With God, all things are possible."
So that I never even tied those two together until we just were talking through this, but
yeah,
it's still. I mean, and it is because I've read it that way for so many years. It makes it hard to get over that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it does.
But I also really liked how we were saying about in the prodigal son, right? There was a chasm between, because the older brother, when the prodigal came home, the older brother went outside, but there wasn't a real chasm there. It was in his mind. He thought there was something between him and his father and him and his brother, but there really wasn't. It was all internal. And in order for him to get over that chasm, he had to completely abolish the chasm. It's not about getting over it. It's about destroying it. It's about getting rid of it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
No?
I think.
No? You're looking at me funny like you don't know what I'm saying.
You're saying the older brother had to destroy it?
Well, I'm just saying that the chasm, because it says that the chasm is there to keep people from crossing the chasm. My point is the chasm isn't supposed to be crossed. It's supposed to be destroyed.
Yes. And it was.
Right.
By Jesus.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But
I'm picking up what you're putting down.
Yeah. And so there was really 2 points to it. Was number one, that the chasm was never real. The older brother imagined there was something between him and his father, but there wasn't.
Yeah.
It was all imagined. And then number two,
it was all in his mind.
And number two, it wasn't that he had to cross the chasm. It was that the chasm had. Number one, it wasn't all. He had to destroy the idea that there was a chasm, I guess is better to say, because there was never really truly a chasm.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that's, I guess, what one of the last notes that I had on that verse was that Jesus tells this parable during his life.
Mm-hmm.
So, whatever death in Hades looked like before, like even if this was a true story, it wasn't a parable, whatever death in Hades looked like prior to the cross, it looks completely different now, bro.
Yeah.
It's...
If you think the cross did anything.
Right. If Jesus defeated
Which I
death...
do, by the way.
Yeah. If Jesus defeated death in Hades on behalf of everyone, if he died as a ransom, which is the price paid to free a slave, that's what that means. The ransom, at least in the way that it was used in the Greek, from my research, it was a price paid to free a slave, and he did it for everyone. He paid that price for all, that ransom for all.
All.
We were slaves.
All.
All means all. We were slaves to sin and death, and now we've been bought with a price, right? So, and there are scriptures that we've read before, and we don't have to read them now because we've been going for quite some time now. But the scriptures that talk about the harrowing of hell, right? This idea that Jesus kicks down the gates of hell, goes in, preaches the gospel, clears the place out, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's 1 Peter 3:18-20, 1 Peter 4:5-6, or no, 1 Peter 4 verses 5 and 6, Ephesians 4:4-10, which is a reference to Psalm 68:18. So Christ has crossed the uncrossable chasm. He made a way out of no way, right?
Right.
What Abraham couldn't do, because Abraham couldn't cross the chasm, right? What Abraham couldn't do, Jesus did for all of us. Again, all of us, including this guy, this rich man. So the I had a note on 27. I just said that he's still trying to order Lazarus around.
Yeah,
he still views Lazarus as beneath him. Yeah.
I thought that this. So I just now realized, because I just noticed this in the notes in this Bible. So it's sort of like a study Bible. It's got like notes beside each verse or whatever. And I thought this was interesting because apparently, again, this is not scripture. This is notes. But it says that the oldest Greek manuscript of Luke records the name of the rich man as an abbreviated form of Nineveh. Which is interesting because he doesn't have a name in this translation.
Yeah.
The rich man doesn't. But it's saying in the oldest manuscript of Luke, I guess apparently he did have a name, and it's the abbreviated form of Nineveh.
Wow.
Which is interesting.
That is interesting. Yeah.
And I don't have really anything to bring that up other than I just thought it was interesting.
Yeah. I don't know.
And because Nineveh, like when I see it, I think Jonah, which we just did an episode on. So
yeah. So I did. Huh?
Nineveh repented.
They did. They sure did. They repented, and
which gives me hope for the rich man.
yeah, and yeah, they repented. Yeah, and in that story, man, and in that story, there's someone ticked. There's someone in agony.
Guys, stopped being ticked at other people. Everybody love everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, that is interesting how all those stories have all those different connections to each other, because we've already tied the prodigal son to the rich man and Lazarus, and then obviously Jonah shares characteristics of the older brother. He didn't see that in the prodigal son story. Jonah is like the older brother. He's weeping and gnashing his teeth
right
on the outside of the city of Nineveh because they're receiving something he didn't think they were worthy of.
I wonder if
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure it doesn't. If Nineveh has any sort of 5 associated with it. I say that because
5 brothers.
Well, the 5 brothers, but also because Jonah went down to Sheol or whatever, which is to die.
Yeah.
Resurrected, as we talked about in the Jonah episode.
Yeah. Well, Jonah apparently went down to Sheol, which is the same as Hades, which is where this rich man and Lazarus take place.
Right.
Go ahead.
So anyway, he was resurrected, and then went and told Nineveh, who did repent. But then again, remember what is said at the end of the rich man and Lazarus, when the rich man pleads to send Lazarus from the dead to talk to his 5 brothers, and Abraham says, if they wouldn't listen to Moses and the prophets, they're not going to listen to someone raised from the dead.
Yeah.
So it actually goes right along with the story of Jonah, other than in this story, we don't necessarily end with Lazarus being resurrected, even though he was in the book of John.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I don't know.
That is interesting, though.
It's interesting, but who knows? I could just be conspiracy theorying.
Maybe.
I'm not trying to make any kind of dogma there or anything. I'm just talking about how cool it is.
It is cool. The Bible's cool.
It's pretty cool.
It is really neat when you start seeing how all these things can tie together.
Yeah.
Maybe we're making all of it up, but
I don't think we're making any more up than anybody else does.
Yeah. So I did make a note on verse 28. Just again, we've already talked about it. Like Judah had, 5 full brothers, and so maybe Jesus is pointing this. Maybe Jesus is trying to point to a connection of like Judah.
Yeah.
Judah being, Judah represents the chosen people, and Lazarus the Gentiles, and
And like I said, I think I'm pretty sure it was Caiaphas, whoever the high priest was at this time. Like there was a note that I had read that said that he also had 5 brothers, and so the speculation was that this was a dig at not just the high priest, but I would assume by digging the high priest, you're taking a shot at that whole religious structure.
Right. Yeah.
But also that's the priest, the same priest that had Jesus killed. So kind of makes sense why he would be like, "You suck, bro." I don't think Jesus said that, by the way.
Yeah.
Jesus don't think anybody sucks.
No.
Maybe. I think you suck, but Jesus doesn't. Just kidding.
Make that a t-shirt. Yeah. So I'm trying to look over my notes right here.
I'm looking up the 5 brothers thing just to make sure that I'm not being silly. And I'm right. So that's all there is to it.
Are you?
Always. Not one time on this show have I ever been wrong. Yeah, I don't know. He was definitely the high priest during Jesus's. He was the organizer of the plot to kill Jesus. What a dodo head.
Dodo. Well, I don't know. I started to speculate a little bit, but I would literally just be throwing nonsense at the wall and hoping it sticks. Yeah, I don't know. What I was gonna say is, like, I wonder if, like, isn't, like, where else is Nineveh mentioned in the scriptures? Isn't it mentioned, like, other times? Like I wonder what the surrounding areas of Nineveh were. I wonder if there was, like, 5, like, major areas.
Yeah, I don't know.
Nineveh.
I don't know nothing about Nineveh except for
I don't
Jonah.
really know much about it either, actually.
Yeah, so this is what it says on Wikipedia, which everybody knows is the truth.
Absolutely.
It
Could
says
possibly be wrong.
the father and 5 brothers who will not be convinced even if the parable Lazarus is raised from the dead predict Caiaphas, Ananias, and the 5 sons of Ananias. So apparently he did have 5.
That is pretty interesting.
Because Caiaphas was the son of Ananias.
Interesting.
So
that makes sense.
Anyway, that wasn't. I didn't make that up on my own because I'm not that smart. Somebody else did.
Yeah. Well, and if you, Caiaphas said it's better that this one man die than that we all perish, right? That's what he said about Jesus. And as we discussed in the Jonah story, something very similar is said.
Mm-hmm.
Right. They throw Jonah overboard so that the rest of them don't die.
They didn't want to, though. But they
didn't want to, but they did. But I do think it's interesting because why did he... Again, we've already stated this. It's because Jesus said to the Pharisees in John 5, you search the scriptures because you think that in them you have eternal life. In them. In your tradition and in your... You know the scriptures inside and out.
Mm-hmm.
They knew the scriptures better than anyone.
Oh, keep preaching it.
But they could not see that the one that they were pointing to was standing right in front of them.
Right.
You know?
That's funny because then that was going to be my point in the next verse.
Oh, okay. Well, go ahead.
No, that's just where I was getting at with because I think we're on 29 and 30, right?
Yeah. They loved the scriptures more than they loved love. That's the last thing I want to say about that John 5 section.
Well, something similar to that because when I read verse 29, but Abraham replied, they have Moses and the prophets, let them listen to them. And then he goes on to say, if they will not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded if someone is risen from the dead.
And it's obviously pointing to Jesus, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But it's this idea that's what, when you read the law and the prophets, which is, by the way, the Old Testament.
Yeah.
I want to throw that out there because simply going back to the Sermon on the Mount, it's one of my little pet peeves. When people read that section there about the law and the prophets, they always remember the law part and leave off the prophets.
Yeah.
And the whole point is that it's pointing to Jesus.
Yeah, it all points to Jesus.
And so that's the point here, but it's how hard is it, not just for to see at times, even for me. I mean, I've talked about it several times from last year in that Bible read through, reading through some of that Old Testament stuff, hard to see. But even still, just looking at these as if they're just rules to follow.
Right.
They're not rules to follow. I don't know, man. It's frustrating for me, and I don't even know how I want to phrase it because I try to be. I don't want to offend anybody.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But I don't. I just people take the law. I mean, I guess the only way I could say it is I think that people still look at the law the same way the Pharisees did.
Yeah.
And that's literally what he's telling him not to do here. They won't listen to... It's not... Because he says they will not listen to Moses and the prophets, but the Pharisees did listen to the... They did. They thought. Because they were following the law to the T.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when Jesus is saying you won't listen to me, or when he's using the Pharisees here as an example and saying that they're not listening to Moses and the prophets, they thought that they were listening to the prophets.
Yeah.
In following the law. So when I hear people try to use the law, the Old Testament law, as though it's some sort of guidelines to follow, that's exactly what I think about here. Is like that's what the Pharisees were doing, and they thought they were doing right, and Jesus told them. We have example after example after example of him telling them, you do not understand my words. You're not listening to Moses and the prophets, because if you were, you would find love.
Yes. Yeah. Because God is love.
Right.
Yeah. Man, I had a thought whenever you were saying that I lost. Oh, Paul, right? It's interesting. I don't remember. I don't remember the exact scripture references, but at one point, Paul says that he was blameless according to the law.
Mm-hmm.
He also says somewhere that he was the chief of sinners.
Right.
So you can be blameless according to the law. You can keep the law and still be the chief of all sinners.
Right. Which goes back to how do you if the Pharisees or are following the law to the T, well then how is my righteousness supposed to surpass that of the Pharisees? That you just hit it right on the head right there.
Yeah.
Because you can follow the law and it means nothing
apart from love.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what Paul talks about that all the time.
Not to mention that the law was given to the Jewish people, and
right.
Me, nor you,
Not
nor
us.
any person that we really know are. So it's not applicable to us anyway. But
Paul makes that pretty clear too, really.
Right.
But anyway.
That's just, for the reason why I kind of ranted on that for a minute is because that's a pet peeve of mine. It just drives me nuts because I still hear people to this day talk about that. And I'm not talking about like what we were talking about at the beginning of like people setting up straw mans. I'm talking about people that I know.
Yeah.
That I talk to in person.
Right.
So.
Yeah. One thing I thought was pretty interesting is that the name Eliezer, like if this was a call back to Eliezer, that the name Eliezer means God is helper.
Mm-hmm.
And Adam, when God saw that Adam was, it's the same word, Azer, in Hebrew, means helper. Like whenever Adam, mankind, needed a helper, right? God said that he needed a helper, right? He recognized his need for a helper.
Right.
And the name Eliezer means God is helper. And then
my favorite helper.
Yeah. And then the name Yeshua means God is salvation.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think that that's an interesting connection there also. I heard a theory. I don't know. I don't really see it myself, but I heard a theory that one guy was saying that he thought that that Lazarus was supposed to represent Jesus.
Yeah, I saw that too. I actually meant to mention that and had forgotten about it by now.
I don't know that I buy it though, but it is interesting.
Well,
I guess
the framing that I heard made a little bit of sense to me because he said because at the end when it says if they wouldn't listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded if someone should rise from the dead. And of course, Jesus rose from the dead.
Yeah,
and so they still didn't believe. And we already had established that the law and the prophets are pointing to Jesus. Like the whole point of reading them is to find Jesus in them. And so. Yeah. What the point was that they didn't find him in the law and the prophets, and therefore they're not going to recognize him.
Yeah,
when he so that's the only connection that he was the one that I read was making.
Oh, well, I read it. But the guy that I was listening to on this, he was talking about Psalm 22, which is the one that Jesus quotes from the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? If you read through there, it talks about he was surrounded by dogs, is mentioned in that Psalm 22, which,
I don't know why dogs are being so slandered in the Bible, because I like dogs.
Yeah, I don't know. It is weird. But
dogs are cool. There should have been cats. Cats suck.
Yeah, I don't really care for it either. I'm allergic, though. So
Coco likes you, whether you like her or not.
I don't dislike dogs. I always have to, like, when I come here, if I pet the dogs, I have to wash my hands immediately. I cannot touch my face.
Yeah.
But, you know.
Only time I don't like dogs is when I'm running and they chase me.
Yeah.
I'm not fast, and they are.
But that Psalm 22, it says that he was surrounded by dogs, which is, if you go and you read Psalm 22, that whole thing is basically laying out the whole, like, crucifixion, like what takes place there. And, dogs, like we mentioned before, were also, it was a term for Gentiles. And, Jesus, he's surrounded by the Roman soldiers who would have been considered Gentile dogs, right, by the Jewish people. But then also Lazarus is surrounded by dogs outside the city gate, right? Outside the gate. And Jesus is crucified outside the city of Jerusalem, surrounded by dogs.
Got that dog in him.
And of course, Jesus had wounds.
Right.
Just like Lazarus. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know. I didn't look too hard into that one, but it was an interesting take.
It makes a lot of sense to me, actually.
Yeah, there are elements of it, I think, that do make sense, but
especially if, like what I was saying earlier about the reason Abraham being used is, like, the whole parable is about the Jewish rejection of Jesus and the Gentiles' embrace.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like, that interpretation makes a lot more sense if Jesus is the Lazarus character.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. Something to think about.
Something to
think about, though. So we've been going for a very long time. It
just feels like a twinkling of an eye. Like a blink and a twinkling of an eye.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess for me, the last thing I guess I want to say, like, 1 John, right, makes it clear that we cannot say that we love God unless we also love our neighbor.
Yep.
Love of God and love of neighbor are inseparable.
Absolutely. Say that one more time.
Love of God and love of neighbor are inseparable.
Can I get an amen?
Amen.
Hallelujah.
So, and then in Matthew 25, Jesus tells us that we're going to find him in the least of these, in the Lazaruses,
right,
in our own life,
right.
That's where we see Jesus,
right,
And
I just want to add on that last one that you said about loving God and loving the other is inseparable.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say that's always been my theory, is that's why I don't think that Paul in Galatians is disagreeing with Jesus. And what I mean by that is Jesus, when asked the commandments, he said, first is to love God, and the second is like it, it's to love your neighbor as yourself. But then Paul in Galatians 5:14 says the fulfillment of all the law is to love your neighbor as yourself. Yeah. I don't think that those contradict each other. I don't think that that Paul disagrees with Jesus. What I think, my theory, is that it's because Paul recognized that to love your neighbor is to love God.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, 1 John says that outright. And then I'm actually, now thinking about it, I'm pretty sure the way that it's worded, like when Jesus is asked the question, I'm pretty sure the question that he's asked is, which is the greatest commandment?
Yes.
Not commandments.
Right.
So if the guy's asking for a single command and Jesus gives two, then maybe, I mean, already there you have Jesus making the two inseparable.
Right.
As the same command, essentially. And then 1 John tells, and again, and Paul tells, I think so.
It's not really, I don't know that it's relevant to what you were saying, but I always have to throw that one in there because I do, because I always have to throw it in there because I want to make sure people get that. I want to. If you listen to this podcast, you're going to hear it over and over and over and over again. It is the one message that I have.
Yeah. Somehow, I guess, like if I was going to give an interpretation of this, right? Like we've talked about a bunch of different like things we noticed that were cool, different connections, possible connections here. Like what maybe this is pointing to that, maybe this is pointing to that. I think the point of this story, more than anything else, is man, you have some Lazaruses in your life. Treat them well.
Yeah,
love them. That's what I think the main takeaway is. The love of God didn't abide in the rich man.
Right.
Does it abide in us?
Right.
Yeah.
I think that goes along with recognizing yourself in the stories as every character, not just the hero.
Yeah.
But the bad guy, right? We've talked about that before. Like, it's really easy to read us as not the Pharisees, but the other side. But like we're also Pharisees.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You know, like
yeah.
We're also there are times in our life when we have been the Lazaruses.
Mm-hmm.
There's also been times when we've been the rich man.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So I mean, in terms of like eternal conscious torment, I didn't really focus too much on this, but just because like to me that's not the point of the story.
Right.
I think the to reduce this parable down solely to a proof text for eternal conscious torment, I think it's just missing the heart of what Jesus is trying to get at in the first place.
Right. Which that goes right along with like one of my big, like, I don't want to say complaints, but like one of the issues that I have with like a lot of mainstream religion is that we've made Christianity all about dying. What happens when you die?
Yeah.
Where are you going to go when you die? And like we've reduced this life to nothing. But I don't believe Jesus taught us. I don't think his teachings were to tell us how to die.
Yeah.
He taught us how to live.
Right.
You know, and like when you reduce the rich man and Lazarus down to a story or like a proof text for eternal conscious torment or like a proof text for this is what happens when after you die, like you're completely ignoring the real life that Orthodox guy that I was listening to on YouTube said today. Like the whole reason that they believe Lazarus' name was given
Mm-hmm.
was to make it more personable. Like Lazarus is a human.
Yeah.
This isn't about like what happens when you die. This is about today.
Yeah.
Like what are you going to do when you see that Lazarus out there?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
That's actually something. I mean, we talked about it a little bit last week. It's the episode would have just dropped today, actually, the day that we're recording this, but it would have dropped today. I talked about the book I was reading that by Shane Claiborne. I'm still reading it. Of course, I hadn't had as much time to read this week as I'd wanted to, but because he talks a lot. I mean, that's kind of his whole thing is being in solidarity with the poor and living amongst the poor. He became not just living amongst them as like a poser, but like actually becoming poor. And like living in the inner city with the poor and being a part of their community. And like, that's something that I'm really struggling with a lot today. I think that a lot of times even those of us who want to take Jesus's word seriously, we kind of try to explain them away because it's uncomfortable. But, which, I mean, I think we all know it's supposed to be uncomfortable, but especially when it comes to his teachings on the poor and the wealthy. Right? Because like I'm not wealthy by any means, but compared to some of the poor, I'm pretty well off.
Right.
You know, I'm not inconvenienced, I would say. I would put it that way.
Yeah.
And I don't know that that's a good thing, but it's also like something that I've been struggling with a lot lately. Just especially the last couple weeks, but
yeah. Well, like everyone wants to say how Jesus talked about hell more than anyone, which he never uses the word hell. He uses the word Gehenna and Hades. But what Jesus talked about even more than hell was money, man. He talked about money a ton.
Well, and even think about some of the texts that people use to say that Jesus talked about hell, like the Matthew passages, you know, like the
sheep and the goats, Matthew 25.
Matthew 25, what did you do? It wasn't like, what did you believe?
Yeah.
It was, how did you treat the poor? Like,
right.
I was naked Did you clothe me? I was hungry. Did you feed me? I was in prison. Did you come and visit me? Like, it's not anything about what you believe, but about how you treat other people, and not just other people, but how you treat the least of these. How do you treat the marginalized? How do you treat the oppressed? How do you treat the discriminated against? You know, like
those who are suffering.
Yes. How do you treat those who are suffering? Those are the ones, like, sure, Jesus talked a lot about quote unquote hell, even though he never used the word hell, but he always framed it in terms of how you treated others.
Mm-hmm.
And like we today have completely ignored that, I feel like. And maybe I'm overstating that because it's something that's really heavy on my heart right now, but I feel like we just almost have overlooked it. And we've made it relates back to what I was saying about how we've made Christianity today all about death and dying and what happens when you die. And like, if that's your whole focus, then who cares? Like, we're not focused about people suffering.
Yeah.
We're just worried about making people get their quote unquote get saved. Like,
yeah,
I don't know, man. It's something that's been on my heart a lot. I know that there's a lot more I can do. That's what I'm saying. I'm not up here on a soapbox preaching out to the people listening, because I am preaching to myself. Like, I'm not doing enough, and I know I'm not doing enough.
Yeah. Yeah. It is hard whenever if you actually take Jesus' words seriously, it's hard.
But I think that's what it means, like, to crucify your flesh, right?
Yeah.
Crucifying, nothing is pleasant about that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, here's something that I thought about in terms of this parable specifically. It would seem odd for Jesus to spend so much of his ministry here on earth telling us how to treat people that are suffering, how we're supposed to have compassion, which means to co-suffer.
Right.
The word passion has to do with suffering. That's why, like, the passion of the Christ, it's the suffering of Christ. That word passion means to suffer. And co-suffering is what the word compassion means. We're supposed to suffer with those who are suffering. That's what compassion is. And to love, the agape, it's other-centered, it's self-sacrificing, it's love for the other, sacrificing yourself for the other. That's what Jesus displayed to perfection on the cross.
Right.
And it would be really odd for Jesus to tell us all that and then change his mind after we die.
Right.
That's what I thought about with this parable specifically. Because, like, all of a sudden, I'm supposed to rejoice that the rich man is suffering. I've been told throughout Jesus' whole ministry has been about caring for the suffering.
And not just that,
others.
Also too, but to loving not just your neighbor, but your enemy.
Your enemy.
Right? It doesn't outright say that the rich man and Lazarus were enemies, but it seems like there's an enemy dynamic going on there.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, would it be Christ-like for Lazarus to take joy and pleasure in the fact that he's getting his reward, and the rich man? That's not Christ-like.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it goes back to some of the Calvinist stuff about, like, or is it Calvin that said something about, like, to the people in heaven enjoying seeing the.
Well, there's been several people that
like,
have said sick things like that.
But it goes back to that. Like, I don't know how I could, and this has been something it was a question I had even when I was a child.
Yeah. About,
like, how am I supposed to be, even if I make it to heaven, how am I going to be, how is it going to be bliss if there's people I know suffering in hell? Like, that doesn't make sense. And, like, I never did get a good answer for it, but I think, like, probably most of the time, like, the one that stands out to me was like, well, you'll be in the presence of God, so you won't even be thinking about that. But that's just so asinine to me.
To be in the presence of God, who is agape.
Yeah.
That's the thing. God, that could make sense if you only think of God as a judge, holy, just if you don't think of God as love, which is what God is revealed to be in Scripture.
Right.
Agape love, specifically self-sacrificing love, the closer you get to God, if we're talking about being in the presence of God, the closer you get to God, who is a consuming fire, that consuming fire should be transforming you. That's what the fire does. It transforms you more into the image and likeness of itself, which is agape,
love. Yeah.
which is self-sacrificing love. So the idea that we would somehow lose all care for the other by getting closer to God is blasphemy. And I'll fight someone on it.
I agree.
I'll go full Peter and pull my sword out on that one. I'll ask for forgiveness later. No, I'm just joking. But that one does, man, you can tell though, that doesn't make any sense.
You're right. It doesn't. I mean, and it should tell something that, like I said, I had these questions when I was a kid about that. Like, that's so elementary that even children can comprehend that something's not right about that.
Right. No, it doesn't make any sense.
Because there's nothing special about. I wasn't like some kind of like savant. Like I'm.
Right.
I think it would be nice to call myself average intelligence. So.
Yeah. I don't know. I that was like the thing that this is what I wrote. I wrote like a closing statement.
Yeah.
And I'll just read it. Should our care for the poor and suffering end at death? Are we truly to believe that Jesus wants us to imitate the perfection of the Father and follow the narrow path of compassion and mercy for the poor and suffering, and to show mercy and compassion and love for our enemies in this life, only to throw it out the window at the end? How are we, who are being transformed more and more into the image and likeness of God, who is agape, how are we to enjoy the banquet at the table, right? We've already alluded to the idea that possibly what's happening in this story is the Lazarus is at the bosom.
Right.
They're dining, feasting. How are we supposed to enjoy the banquet table? Lying at the bosom of the Father who is agape. How are we supposed to enjoy that? Well, there are some who are enduring endless suffering outside. Especially if we're supposed to, even if we can, like you said, even if we consider them our enemies.
Right.
How could we? So, anyone that wants to use this parable as a proof text for eternal conscious torment needs to answer that question for me. And I'm open to it. Email me, call me, text me. We'll have coffee. Explain to me. Come at me, bro. Because there's no way I can wrap my head around that.
Right.
That we're supposed to be.
I'm with you.
Transformed. Paul said that when we see him, we will be like him. We will see him as he truly is. He says in, where is it, 2 Corinthians 3? Says that we're being transformed more and more into the image and likeness of him. Again, who is agape? The same agape that died to save the rich man.
Right.
I mean, I know I'm just repeating myself over and over again here, but I cannot understand how the logic of all this does not lead to, man, that rich man, Jesus made a way out of no way. He crossed that chasm and made a way for that rich man. Does that rich man need to come to himself? Absolutely.
Yep.
Does he need to recognize? Does he need to have his pigpen moment and realize how he has treated Lazarus? Absolutely he does. And he won't be able to enjoy because he couldn't enjoy being in the presence of agape love if that's not what he is. You know?
Yeah.
Like, if you don't love, then love would be a torment to you. So in a way, it's actually more merciful that he is separate here, right? That he's, I don't know. There's a lot to talk about.
Yeah, and I think if there was no transformation, let's just say if both the rich man and Lazarus ended up together without any sort of transformation, the power dynamic is the same there as it was on earth. The rich man is still going to subjugate Lazarus. He's still going to, I mean, you see, even in the parable, he's still ordering Lazarus around. He's the one suffering.
Yeah.
Lazarus is in the bosom of Abraham, and he's still ordering him around, acting like he's his servant.
Yeah.
If there's no transformation that takes place there, then that power dynamic doesn't change.
Right.
They have to become equals.
Yeah.
They have to become equals. And so therefore there has to be a transformation. There's a transformation on both ends, right? Because the rich man has to come down.
Mm-hmm.
And Lazarus has to come up, which he's come up. He's went from suffering outside the city gates to the bosom of Abraham.
Mm-hmm.
He's come up. But the rich man still thinks he's up. He hasn't made that transformation to come down. He hasn't made himself. Remember, he lifted his eyes. Like, he hasn't made himself equal with Lazarus. He still thinks he's above Lazarus. There has to be a transformation, right? If, again, like you said, I know I'm just repeating myself, but if there's no transformation that takes place, if that chasm doesn't exist until the rich man is transformed, nothing changes.
Yeah. It reminds me of the story of Esau and who's the other cat's name? His brother. Jacob and Esau. They have this falling out, right? Like, and I think you could actually view, Esau and Jacob as representatives of Jew and Gentile.
Right.
But anyway, there's this falling out, but they're reconciled in the end to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And Jacob sees Esau, and he says, how's it worded? When I look at you, I see the face of God, something like that.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly how it's worded, but what stands out to me is it's funny enough because it goes back to the idea of separation between brothers or between the father and the son, right? Because when they were traveling and Jacob and Esau were coming back together, and Jacob was afraid that Esau was going, in his mind, there was this enmity between them. There was this chasm. Since we're using that language, I've said that word more times today than any other. But
I like how you use the chasm instead of chasm.
No, it's chasm for me.
Okay.
I don't know how you're supposed to say it. I don't care. It's chasm.
I mean, I've been letting you say it the whole time, but that's
chasm
fine.
Sounds better.
Okay.
Chasm.
Whatever you say, bro.
I don't know. But anyway, there's this chasm.
You can say chasm. It's fine.
Now chasm sounds weird. You've made fun of me for it. So it's between them,
right?
But it's not real.
Yeah.
There's nothing between them.
It's in Jacob's head.
It's in his mind.
Yeah. And yet they're reconciled in the end. This whole thing, man, it's about reconciliation. You know what I mean? Like, I don't see how... Robin Perry talks about this. Talks about how... And apparently he's picking this theme up from N.T. Wright. But just the idea that, like, this is a story. Like, all of creation is like a story that God is writing or has written or will write. However, I don't care how you conceptualize time and all that. But what is the best ending to the story? Is God writing a tragedy? Or is he writing a story that ends in the most beautiful display of ultimate reconciliation for everyone? What's the more beautiful ending to the story?
I think it's a comedy.
Might be.
Sometimes I wonder.
Yeah. But you know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I feel you.
I can't see any other way that this ends. And because, what we explained earlier is basically like if you just left it at that, then you're talking about the C.S. Lewis approach. The rich man, he's being tormented by his own sin, and he refuses to listen to the words of Christ, and
Right.
he just remains there forever. He never turns. But I don't believe that. I believe that there is a time
Yeah, I mean, I
in
think
which everyone will have that pigpen moment.
I think if you believe that, there's one thing that I think you have to answer for, and that is, does God's love ever quit? Because even if you stay there for a bazillion, you stay on that side of the chasm for a billion, zillion, million, trillion years.
Yeah.
He's going to pursue you for a billion, million, zillion, trillion in one day. His love, do you really, truly believe that he won't relent?
Right.
Because I think if you take that approach and believe that somebody continues, they will never be reconciled because they choose not to be reconciled, what you're saying is that their will is stronger than God's will. Because we know, as Scripture says, that it's God's will that all shall be saved.
Yeah.
So if that's his will and you believe that somebody won't because of their own free will choice, then what you're saying is that their will is stronger than God's will. Their will
Right.
outlast God's. That
Yeah.
their rejection of God's love is stronger than God's love.
Yeah.
That's what ultimately.
Yeah.
That's why I like that approach, that C.S. Lewis approach makes sense to me up to that point. Like, it makes sense to me if you say people might, I don't know, like, because I don't know how to conceptualize time outside of our reality on this planet of Earth. But it's the only way we have to talk about these kind of things. So I'm going to use the phrase, the terminology. Even if you think that somebody stays there for a however long, infinite amount of time, I can buy it. It's just that eventually, I don't know how far in advance that would be, I have to believe that eventually it's going to happen, or else what I just described would be the case. Their will would outweigh God's will.
And Paul tells us outright in 1 Corinthians 13 that love never fails.
Never
fails. We sing about it all the time too.
Yeah, we do.
In Song of Songs 8, verse 6,
Well, yeah.
says, "Put me like a seal over your heart, like a seal on your arm, for love is as strong as death, and jealousy as severe as Sheol." His jealousy towards us, that he wants us, and he will not stop until we're found. His jealousy is as severe as Sheol. Its flashes are flashes of fire, the very flame of the Lord. What's flashes are flashes of fire? His love.
Yeah.
Love. Its flashes are flashes of fire, the very flame of the Lord. Like I mentioned earlier, in Deuteronomy 32:22, it says that the fire of God's wrath reaches to Sheol. What I think that wrath is the flames of God's love, his fiery love that's after anything in you that's not of love's kind. And so, yeah, I think that fire reaches to Sheol, it reaches to Hades. So the rich man that's in Hades, the fiery flames of God's love will not stop coming after. His wrath will not stop coming after him until he's transformed.
Which will make him equal to Lazarus.
Yeah. Reconciliation. So good. Yeah. This it goes on to say, "Many waters cannot quench love, nor will rivers overflow it," which is interesting because we made the connection earlier between the river, crossing the river.
Mm-hmm.
He dried up the river Jordan so that they could cross over in the promised land. Nor will rivers overflow it. Rivers will not overflow it. If a man were to give all the riches of his house for love, it would be utterly despised. And that's what Jesus did.
Yeah.
He gave up everything. And, they killed him.
He can't give up much more than that.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. We've been going for a real long time.
Well.
But I think it was a good one, though.
Yeah.
We probably could break it up into two. Or at least cut out all
We could.
We could take all that Alyssa Childers talk and make it a bonus content
Yeah, we can.
thing or something. I don't know. Just to keep it under 2.5 hours, maybe.
Yeah. If it's that long, we need to do something.
Yeah. All right.
We could maybe do a midweek drop if we dropped it into 2 parts. I don't know if you're the editor, so I don't know how you can edit it to make it flow good, but
yeah, we'll see. Or we may just put it all out there and make you guys take 7 days to listen to it.
yeah, just man up or lady up.
Yeah.
Put your big person britches on.
Right.
You like that? Gender neutral? Put your big person britches on. And just listen to the podcast. Actually, if you're listening... If you're listening to this right now, actually, then you did listen to it all. So you did put your big person britches on, and I'm proud of you. I want you to know something. I'm proud of you.
I'm proud of you.
And you should be proud of yourself. And you're definitely smarter.
Let's give him a round of applause. Hey!
You're for sure smarter. And now you are able to win any kind of debates that people will pose to you on the Rich Man and Lazarus, because we have enlightened you with our knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
What would have been a more appropriate noise there? Fart noise.
We're going to have to make some sound pad sounds here instead of using the stock ones.
Yeah.
We'll have to create some good ones.
Well, I don't know what we're talking about next week. You don't know because we haven't talked about it.
Nope. Nope.
There's no
idea.
previews coming up for next week.
Maybe we'll have a guest in next week.
You know what? Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Let's commit to it right now on air.
We're having a guest.
Having a guest.
Don't know who it's going to be or what we're going to talk about.
Yep.
But we're going to have a guest.
Macho Man Randy Savage. We're going to have him on. Oh, yeah.
We could have Big Chad come in here and just do impressions the whole time. Have conversations with like 20 people.
that would actually probably be our most listened to episode.
Yeah, that'd be funny. Wonder if he's listening. Hey, Chad.
Shout out, Chad.
If you're listening, love you, buddy.
And if you're not listening, I'm going to have to fight you.
Mm. All right, I guess we need to just shut up, huh? We've been talking forever.
Shut up. All right, so we will see y'all next week.
All right, bye.